Your family is supposed to be the people you trust most in the world, the ones who protect you when danger comes from outside. But in these cases, the danger didn't come from outside, it came from inside the home, from the one person everyone believed would never hurt them. And the crimes were so devastating that courts decided these killers should never walk free again, locked away for the rest of their natural lives. Today we're covering every single family massacre killer currently serving life in prison. What you're about to hear will shatter any illusions you have about the deadliest domestic crimes in modern history and the monsters who will die behind bars for what they did. Case number 1. Christopher Lee Watts killed his pregnant wife Shanann Watts and their 2 young daughters Bella and Celeste in Frederick, Colorado on August 13, 2008. He strangled his wife in their bedroom and later smothered both daughters with his bare hands. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave at an oilwork site and forced his daughters' bodies through 8-inch openings into crude oil tanks. He pleaded guilty to 9 charges, including 5 counts of first-degree murder, and received 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. 3 of these sentences were ordered to run one after another, meaning he would never be eligible for release. Christopher Watts was born on May 16, 1985 in Spring Lake, North Carolina. Shanann Catherine Ruzicek was born on January 10, 1984 in Aberdeen, North Carolina. The two met through Facebook in 2010, when Shanann accepted a friend request from Chris. At the time, Shanann was going through a difficult period in her life. She had recently been diagnosed with lupus, an autoimmune disease where the body attacks its own organs. This condition made her vulnerable, and she later said that being sick during that time made her open up to Chris in ways she might not have otherwise. They married in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina on November 3, 2012. The couple moved to Colorado in 2013 and purchased a 5-bedroom home in Frederick, a small town about 27 miles north of Denver. The house was located at 2825 Saratoga Trail, in a quiet subdivision surrounded by oil drilling sites. Their first daughter, Bella Marie Watts, was born on December 17, 2013. Their second daughter, Celeste Catherine Watts, nicknamed Cece, was born on July 17, 2015. Shanann's lupus made all of her pregnancies high risk, and her family said she beat all the odds to have children. Chris worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum starting in January 2015. His job involved working at oil and gas sites in Weld County. Shanann worked from home as a brand promoter for Lavelle, a multi-level marketing company that sold health and wellness products, including a product line called Thrive. She became successful at this work and reached the company's 80K club level. The job allowed her to be a stay-at-home mother while earning income, and it included trips to conferences and team-building events. Shanann was very active on Facebook, regularly posting about her family life, her work, and the Thrive products she promoted. The family struggled financially, despite their combined income of around $90,000 per year in 2014. They had credit card debt, student loans, and medical bills. In June 2015, they filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection, claiming liabilities of more than $400,000. Their monthly expenses included a $3,000 mortgage payment and $600 in car payments, which consumed most of their $4,900 in monthly income. Their homeowners association also sued them for unpaid fees. Despite these financial troubles, Shanann's success with Lavelle seemed to be improving their situation. She posted on social media about trips the company paid for to places like Toronto, Punta Cana, and New Orleans. From the outside, the Watts family looked happy and successful. Shanann frequently shared photos and videos of their family life on Facebook. The videos showed Bella singing a song calling her father a hero, and the family enjoying activities together. Friends described Shanann as ambitious, hard-working, and a devoted mother. She was known for always having her phone with her and being easy to reach. Chris appeared to be a quiet, laid-back father who let Shanann make most of the family decisions. But beneath this surface, serious problems were developing in their marriage. In May or June of 2018, Chris met Nicole Kessinger at work. She was a contract employee working in safety for Tasman Geosciences, which had a contract with Anadarko Petroleum. Chris had recently been promoted from a rover position to field coordinator, which meant he spent more time in the office. He brought a broken gas meter to Kessinger's office to be fixed, and they began running into each other frequently at work. Chris was not wearing his wedding ring. He later told investigators that his ring was being resized because he had lost weight and it kept falling off. They began texting, and their messages quickly moved to what Chris described as a different level. They went on their first date in late June 2018, shortly after Chris returned from a trip to San Diego with Shanann. They met at a park in Thornton, and their relationship became physical in early July. By this time, Chris had told Kessinger that he had 2 daughters, but claimed he was in the final stages of a divorce that would be finalized in August. Kessinger believed him. They spent most of July together, meeting 4 or 5 times a week. They went to a car museum in Boulder, attended a drag race at Bandimere Speedway, and went camping at Great Sand Dunes National Park. During this same time, Shanann and the girls spent 6 weeks in North Carolina visiting her family. While they were away, Chris stayed at Kessinger's house almost every night. Shanann tried to reach out to Chris during this trip, sending him messages and trying to repair their struggling marriage. She sensed something was wrong and even left him a letter at home telling him how much she missed him. On August 11th, while Shanann was still in North Carolina, Chris took Kessinger out on a date to the Lazy Dog Sports Bar. He hired a babysitter for the girls and told Shanann he was going to a game with friends. But he made a mistake by using a debit card linked to the family bank account that sent alerts to Shanann's phone. When she saw the charge, she and her friends looked up the menu online and realized the amount was too much for one person. This made Shanann strongly suspect Chris was having an affair. Shanann flew to Arizona for a Lavelle conference on August 9th. She would later share her fears and frustrations about her marriage with friends during this trip. On August 10th, while she was at the conference, Chris searched the internet for information about Nicole Kessinger. 2 days later, on August 12th, Shanann returned home to Colorado. Her friend and co-worker, Nicole Utoft Atkinson, drove her from the airport. They arrived at the Watts home at 1:48 in the morning on August 13th. Ring doorbell camera footage captured Shanann entering the house carrying a small suitcase. In the background, Nicole's car could be seen pulling away from the driveway. Chris was inside the house with Bella and Celeste. What happened next, Chris would later describe in detail during a prison interview in February 2019. He said he woke Shanann up early that morning while he was getting ready for work because he wanted to talk. He climbed on top of her on the bed, straddling her around her waist. Shanann worried that his weight might hurt the baby. They began discussing their marriage and their future. Shanann confronted him about her suspicions that he was having an affair. Chris denied it, but told her that he did not think their marriage was going to work and that he did not love her anymore. Shanann responded by telling him that he would never see the kids again. Chris then placed both of his hands around Shanann's neck and strangled her. The process took at least 2 to 4 minutes. Shanann had bruises in the shape of fingers on her neck, but showed no other injuries, suggesting she did not fight back or scream. Chris later said he did not know why she did not resist. While Chris was still killing Shanann, 4-year-old Bella walked into the bedroom holding her blanket. She asked what was wrong with Mummy. Chris told her that Mummy was not feeling well and that she was sleeping. After Shanann was dead, Chris wrapped her body in a sheet and carried it downstairs. He placed her body on the floor in the back seat of his work truck. Both Bella and Celeste were awake by this point. Chris had both girls sit on the back seat of the truck, directly above their mother's wrapped body. He drove them all to Survey 319, an oil site owned by Anadarko, about 40 miles from their home and 12 miles northeast of Keensburg. During the drive, Chris later said the girls dozed on and off and laid in each other's laps. When they arrived at the oil site, Chris took Shanann's body out of the truck and laid it on the ground. The girls asked him what he was doing to Mummy. Chris first killed 3-year-old Celeste in the back seat of the truck. He put a blanket over her head and smothered her, while 4-year-old Bella sat next to them watching. Bella did not understand what was happening at first. After Celeste was dead, Chris took her body to one of the oil tanks. The opening was only 8 inches wide, and he had to force her small body through it. Her body dropped down into the crude oil. Chris then returned to the truck for Bella. The little girl asked him in a soft voice if the same thing was going to happen to her as happened to Cece. Chris later said he could not recall if he answered her. He put the same blanket over Bella's head and smothered her. Unlike her younger sister, Bella fought back as hard as she could. She bit her tongue during the struggle. Her last words were, "Daddy, no." Chris forced Bella's body through the 8-inch opening of a different oil tank. Her body was scraped as it went through the small opening. Investigators would later find a tuft of soft blonde hair on one of the tanks. After disposing of both daughters' bodies in the crude oil, Chris buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. Chris drove home and began staging evidence to make it look like Shanann had left of her own free will. He took her wedding ring off her finger and placed it on the kitchen counter. He threw a therapy book in the trash. These actions were meant to suggest that Shanann no longer wanted to work on their marriage. Later that morning, around 12:10 in the afternoon on August 13th, Nicole Atkinson became worried when she could not reach Shanann. Shanann had missed a scheduled appointment with her obstetrician and was not responding to text messages. This was very unusual, because Shanann always had her phone with her and always responded quickly. Atkinson went to the Watts home and rang the doorbell and knocked on the door. No one answered. She called Chris, who was at work, and told him she was concerned. She also called the Frederick Police Department to request a welfare check. A Frederick police officer arrived at the house around 1:40 in the afternoon. Chris arrived about 45 minutes later, though he had told Nicole he would be there in 3 minutes. He gave the officer permission to search the house. Inside, they found signs that Shanann had arrived home safely. Her suitcase was by the stairs and her shoes were near the door. The Ring doorbell footage confirmed she had entered, but Shanann was not there and appeared to have taken nothing with her. Her purse, wallet and medication were all in the house. This was especially concerning because Shanann had lupus and would never leave without her medication. Her phone was found in the cushions of the upstairs couch. Her car was in the garage with the girl's car seats still inside. Her wedding ring was on a counter in the master bedroom. The family dog was in the house. Everything suggested that Shanann had returned home safely, but then vanished, along with both children. Police officially reported Shanann, Bella and Celeste missing later that day. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation released endangered missing person alerts for all three. The next day, August 14th, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the search. Chris gave interviews to Denver television stations KMGH and KUSA outside his home. He pleaded for their return. He told reporters that Shanann, Bella and Celeste should come home if they were out there, or if someone had them, that person should bring them back. He said the house was not complete without anyone there. He said he needed to see everyone again. Chris told media that he had left for work around 5:15 to 5:30 that morning, and that he and Shanann had an emotional conversation before he left. He claimed this was the last time he saw them, but investigators were already suspicious. The facts did not make sense. Why would Shanann leave her phone, her car, her purse and her medication behind? Why would she take the girls without their car seats? Where could they have gone? Investigators began looking more closely at Chris's story. They discovered that he was having an affair with Nicole Kessinger. On August 15th, they administered a polygraph test to Chris. He failed it completely. After failing the polygraph, Chris confessed to his father, Ronnie Watts, and then to investigators. But his first confession was a lie. He claimed that when he told Shanann he wanted a divorce, she killed both daughters by smothering them. He said he saw her in the act of strangling Celeste and discovered Bella's body already dead. He claimed he then strangled Shanann in a fit of rage before disposing of all three bodies at the oil site. This story was false. Chris later admitted that investigators had suggested this scenario during questioning, and he simply went with it because it gave him an excuse. He thought his mother and sister might believe it because they had never liked Shanann. He thought some friends might believe it too, because Shanann had a more dominant personality than he did. Chris marked the locations of the bodies on a photograph of the oil field. Investigators arrived at the Survey 319 site on August 16th around 11 o'clock at night. They found all three bodies. Shanann was in the shallow grave. Bella and Celeste were in separate oil tanks, submerged in crude oil and water. Chris was arrested on August 15th, 2018 on suspicion of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. He appeared in Weld County Court on August 16th for a bond hearing. The judge denied bond. Nicole Kessinger went to police voluntarily on August 15th, the same day Chris was arrested. When the news broke about the missing family, she had been shocked to learn that Chris was still married and that his wife was 15 weeks pregnant. She realised he had been lying to her throughout their entire relationship. She told police everything about their affair. She said she had questioned Chris about his family's disappearance, but he tried to change the subject and seemed unconcerned. He had texted her on August 13th, saying his family was gone and claiming his wife had taken the children to a play date. Kessinger grew suspicious and eventually told Chris she would not speak to him again until his family was found. She cooperated fully with investigators and was later placed in witness protection after receiving threats. Autopsy results confirmed the causes of death. Shanann died from strangulation. There were bruises and broken blood vessels in her eyes and damage to her throat. Bella and Celeste died from smothering. Bella had defensive wounds indicating she fought for her life. She had bitten her tongue during the attack. Both girls had substances in their bodies consistent with being submerged in crude oil and water. On August 21st, Chris was formally charged with 9 counts. These included 3 counts of first-degree murder after deliberation, 2 counts of first-degree murder of a victim under 12 by a person in a position of trust, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. The unlawful termination charge was because Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with a son the couple had planned to name Nico Lee Watts. Shanann, Bella, Celeste and Nico were buried together in North Carolina in September 2018. A funeral service was held at Sacred Heart Roman Catholic Church in Pinehurst. The 90-minute service began with the singing of Amazing Grace. Chris was never mentioned. The priest read a statement from Shanann's father, Frank Ruzek, that said Shanann had been pure love, always caring for everyone, and would always be Daddy's little girl. In the months after his arrest, Chris was held in Weld County Jail in Colorado. Other inmates constantly yelled at him from their cells, giving him advice on how he could kill himself and threatening what they would do to him if they got the chance. Everyone in the jail knew who he was and why he was there. He feared for his life. On November 6, 2018, Chris pleaded guilty to all 9 charges against him. He accepted a plea deal offered by prosecutors. In exchange for his guilty plea, the death penalty was taken off the table. Shanann's family had agreed to this arrangement. They did not want to seek Chris's death because they felt it was not their right, and because they understood a death penalty case would drag on for years without providing closure. Chris's sentencing hearing took place on November 19, 2018, in Weld County District Court. Judge Marcelo Kopkow presided. District Attorney Michael Rourke revealed new details about the murders during the hearing. He described how Shanann had been strangled deliberately and viciously for at least 2 to 4 minutes, not in an uncontrolled rage as Chris had initially claimed. He described how Bella had fought back against her father and how her body was scraped as it was forced through the 8-inch opening of the oil tank. He described finding the tuft of blonde hair on the tank. Shanann's family gave victim impact statements. Her father, Frank Ruzek, called Chris an evil monster, not just a monster. He said prison was too good for Chris, and that it was hard for him to say, but he hoped God would have mercy on Chris's soul. Shanann's mother, Sandy Ruzek, explained that she did not want death for Chris because that was not her right. She said she had trusted him to take care of her daughter and granddaughters. Shanann's brother, Frank Ruzek Jr., had his statement read by the prosecutor. He said he could not sleep and was anguished knowing Chris had robbed him of being an uncle. He asked what kind of person slaughters the people they love most. Chris's parents, Ronnie and Cindy Watts, were allowed to give statements because they were the grandparents of Bella and Celeste, making them victims under Colorado law. They condemned the crimes and did not ask for leniency. Ronnie Watts said they still did not have answers and hoped Chris could help them understand one day. Cindy Watts said she was struggling to understand the absolute horror and would never recover from the trauma, but she told Chris that he was still her son and she loved him and always would. Chris bounced his leg up and down as his family spoke, but showed no tears. Judge Kopkow called the murders the most inhumane and vicious crime he had handled in the thousands of cases he had seen over his 17 years on the bench. He said anything less than the maximum sentence would fail to reflect the seriousness of the crimes. He sentenced Chris to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. 3 were to be served consecutively, meaning one after another. He also sentenced Chris to 48 years for the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy and 36 years for 3 counts of tampering with deceased bodies, for a total additional sentence of 84 years. When the judge asked Chris if he wished to make a statement, Chris said only, "No, sir." His attorney read a brief statement, saying Chris was devastated, and, although he understood his words were hollow, he was sincerely sorry. Chris was transferred from Colorado to an undisclosed facility in Wisconsin in December 2018 for his own safety. On February 18, 2019, investigators from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and Frederick Police Department interviewed Chris at the Dodge Correctional Institution in Warpen, Wisconsin. This nearly 5-hour interview was the first time Chris fully confessed to killing all 3 victims and provided detailed accounts of what happened. He admitted he had lied about Shanann killing the children. He said that story had been suggested during an interrogation, and he just went with it. He admitted he had killed Bella and Celeste himself at the oil site. During this interview, Chris described in disturbing detail how he killed his daughters. He said he could still hear Bella's voice, asking if the same thing was going to happen to her as happened to Cece. He said he heard Bella saying, "Daddy, no," every day in prison. He said he had tried to picture the long drive to the oil site and wondered if he could have saved his girls' lives. He questioned whether he had even been a dad at one point. He said if he had been thinking, none of it would have happened. But he also said that when he woke up that morning, it felt like it was going to happen, and he had no control over it. Chris told investigators he kept photos of Shanann and the girls in his prison cell and talked to them every morning and every night. He had a book he used to read to Celeste, and he read it to his daughters along with scripture every night. He said if things were different, he would have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and more than likely a 1-month-old son, and a beautiful wife. But right now it was just him. He said he had read the Bible cover to cover for the first time in prison. He said he knew people would define him by that one moment, but only God could judge him, and he had asked for God's forgiveness. The Watts family murders became one of the most publicized family annihilation cases in recent American history. It drew international media attention immediately after the disappearance was reported. The case was covered extensively by news outlets across the country and around the world. Documentaries and television specials were produced about the murders. In September 2020, Netflix released a documentary titled American Murder: The Family Next Door. The film used social media posts, police body camera footage, police interrogation videos, text messages, and home security footage to tell the story. It became one of Netflix's most watched true crime documentaries. The case has been studied by criminal psychologists and law enforcement professionals. Former FBI profiler Candice DeLong noted that family annihilation cases are rare and that most family annihilators commit suicide after the murders, something Chris claimed he had considered but did not do. He said he did not kill himself at the oil site because he worried an explosion or fire might hurt other people in the area. Experts have examined Chris's behaviour during his media interviews and interrogations, noting his lack of emotion and his attempts to appear concerned when he was actually guilty. The case highlighted issues of domestic violence, even though there was no known history of physical violence in the Watts marriage. Experts have noted that family annihilations often occur when a partner wants to start a new life, but sees their family as an obstacle they need to eliminate, rather than simply leaving through divorce. Chris's affair with Nicole Kessinger and his desire to be with her appeared to be a major factor in his decision to murder his family, though he never provided a complete explanation for why he chose murder over divorce. The murders occurred in August, before the school year started. Criminal profilers have noted that many family annihilations happen in August because the timing can delay detection and investigation when children are not in school. The case also drew attention to the role of social media in modern life. Shanann's extensive Facebook presence meant there was a detailed public record of the family's life, which investigators and journalists used to piece together the story. But it also meant the family's tragedy played out in an extremely public way. Shanann's family has worked to preserve her memory and the memory of Bella and Celeste. They have spoken about their grief and their hope that the case raises awareness about domestic violence and the importance of intervening when families are in crisis. They asked for privacy and for online harassment to stop. In July 2019, Shanann's father, Frank Ruzicek, gave a statement to local television stations pleading for the harassment to end. The Watts family home in Frederick remained a site of public interest. People left flowers and tributes outside the house. The property became the subject of legal negotiations. It was eventually sold. The case continues to fascinate and horrify people years later. It serves as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that even families that seem happy from the outside can be hiding darkness. It raises questions about warning signs, about how someone can commit such brutal acts against people they are supposed to love, and about whether such tragedies can be prevented. Chris Watts remains in prison in Wisconsin, serving his life sentences with no possibility of parole. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico rest together in North Carolina, remembered by a family that loved them and a community that mourned them. The case stands as one of the most disturbing family murder cases in recent memory, a tragedy that destroyed lives and left questions that may never be fully answered. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 2. Case number 2. John Emil List killed his wife Helen, his mother Alma, and his 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick, in their Westfield, New Jersey home on November 9, 1971. He shot each family member methodically using 2 handguns. After arranging their bodies in the mansion's ballroom, he disappeared and lived under a false name for nearly 18 years. He was arrested in Virginia on June 1, 1989, after his case was featured on the television show America's Most Wanted. He was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder on April 12, 1990, and sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms, which meant he would never be eligible for parole. He died in prison in 2008. John Emil List was born on September 17, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan. He was the only child of German-American parents, John Frederick List and Alma Maria Barbara Florence List. His parents were devout Lutherans who attended church regularly and studied the Bible at home. His mother was extremely protective and controlling. As a child, John was forbidden from leaving his neighborhood under his mother's strict instructions. He had no friends during his childhood. In high school, he pushed back somewhat against his mother's overprotectiveness and tried to make his own path. But he still made few friends and no girlfriends. Like his father before him, John became a devoted Lutheran and eventually taught Sunday school. John graduated from Bay City Central High School in 1943. That same year, he enlisted in the United States Army to serve in World War II. He worked as a laboratory technician during his military service. His father died in 1944 while John was still serving. After John was discharged from the Army in 1946, he enrolled at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting. He was commissioned as a lieutenant through the Reserve Officers Training Corps program. In November 1950, as the Korean War grew worse, John was recalled to active military duty. He was stationed at Fort Eustis in Virginia. There he met Helen Morris Taylor, who lived nearby. Helen was a widow whose husband, an infantry officer, had been killed in action in Korea. She had a daughter named Brenda from her first marriage. John and Helen married on December 1, 1951, in Baltimore, Maryland. The family moved to Northern California, where John's accounting skills led the Army to reassign him to the Finance Corps. After John completed his second military tour in 1952, the family moved to Detroit, where John took a job with an accounting firm. He later worked as an audit supervisor at a paper company in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Between 1955 and 1958, Helen gave birth to their 3 children. Patricia was born first in 1955, then John Jr. in 1956, and Frederick in 1958. By 1959, John had risen to the position of general supervisor of the company's accounting department. He appeared to be building a successful career, but serious problems existed beneath the surface of the List family. Helen was an alcoholic whose drinking was becoming more severe. She had also contracted syphilis from her first husband before she married John, but she had not told John about this disease before their marriage. The condition went untreated for years, and her health slowly deteriorated. In 1960, Helen's daughter Brenda married and moved out of the house. That same year, John moved the rest of his family to Rochester, New York, to take a job with Xerox. He eventually became Director of Accounting Services there. In 1965, John accepted what seemed like a major career advancement. He was offered a position as Vice President and Comptroller at a bank in Jersey City, New Jersey. The family moved to Westfield, New Jersey, an affluent suburban town about 25 miles from New York City. They purchased a huge Victorian mansion called Breeze Knoll, located at 431 Hillside Avenue. The house had 19 rooms, including a grand ballroom with marble fireplaces and a stained glass skylight that was rumoured to be a signed Tiffany original, worth at least $100,000 at that time. John's elderly mother Alma, who was then 84 years old, moved into the mansion with them. She lived in an apartment that the family created on the 3rd floor. From the outside, the List family looked like the perfect example of the American dream. They lived in a beautiful mansion in a nice neighbourhood. John had a prestigious job as a bank executive. The family attended the Redeemer Lutheran Church every Sunday. John was so devoted that he taught Sunday school classes. He was also a Boy Scout troop leader. The children went to good schools. Helen worked on the house and took care of the family. To their neighbours and community, they appeared successful and happy. But the reality was very different. Helen's health continued to decline. In 1969, a thorough medical examination finally revealed that she had syphilis. By this time, the disease had progressed to its tertiary stage, the most serious form. Combined with her heavy alcohol consumption, the syphilis had transformed her from what witnesses described as an attractive young woman into an unkempt and paranoid recluse. She frequently humiliated John, both privately and in public. According to testimony that would later be heard at his trial, She would compare his sexual abilities unfavorably to those of her first husband. Their marriage became deeply troubled. John was also struggling with the fact that his daughter Patricia was growing up. She was 16 years old and becoming interested in boys and acting. She had started participating in school plays. To John's rigid religious mind, this represented his daughter straying from God and becoming corrupted by the world. He worried constantly about her emerging sexuality and independence. He felt he was losing control over his family. His wife had stopped attending church with him regularly. His children were becoming more independent. His strict religious views made him see these normal developments as spiritual failures. The family was also in serious financial trouble. In 1971, John lost his job when the Jersey City Bank closed. This was devastating to him. He had built his entire identity around being a successful provider for his family. The shame and humiliation of losing his job was more than he could bear to share with his family, so he kept it a secret. Every morning, he would dress in his suit and tie as if he was going to work. He would leave the house at his normal time, but instead of going to the bank, he would go to the Westfield train station. He would sit there reading newspapers all day until it was time to come home. He did this day after day, week after week. His family never knew that he had been fired. Without his income, John could not pay the bills. The mortgage on the huge mansion was $3,000 per month, which was a substantial amount in 1971. The family had credit card debt, student loans, and medical bills. John began secretly taking money from his mother's bank accounts to avoid defaulting on the mortgage payments. He encouraged his children to find part-time jobs. He told them it was to teach them responsibility and maturity, but the real reason was that he desperately needed help keeping the family financially afloat. The situation grew more and more desperate. The family owed money to creditors. The homeowners association was suing them for unpaid fees. But John could not bring himself to tell his family the truth or to ask for help. In John's mind, shaped by his rigid religious upbringing and his authoritarian father's teachings, there were only two possible solutions to his situation. He could accept welfare assistance, which would provide money for his family, but would expose his failure publicly. His father had taught him that a man must take care of his family without accepting charity. Accepting welfare would mean admitting to everyone that he had failed as a provider. It would bring shame and ridicule to his family. John found this option completely unacceptable. The other solution that formed in his mind was to kill his entire family and then kill himself. He believed that if he did this, their souls would go to heaven. He thought he was saving them from the poverty and shame that would come when everyone learned he had lost his job. He thought he was protecting them from a future of suffering. John began planning the murders months in advance. On November 5th, 1971, 4 days before he would carry out his plan, he asked his family members a strange question. He wanted to know how each of them would want their remains to be handled after they died. His family did not understand why he was asking such a morbid question, but they answered him. John was gathering information he would need after the murders. The morning of November 9th, 1971 started like any other day. John's 3 children got ready for school. Patricia was 16 years old and in high school. John Jr. was 15 and also in high school. Frederick was 13 and in junior high school. John took the children to school that morning. His wife Helen, who was 46 years old, stayed home. His mother Alma, who was 84, remained in her third-floor apartment. After dropping the children at school, John returned home. He took 2 guns from his car. One was a 9mm Steyr 1912 semi-automatic handgun that he owned. The other was his late father's Colt .22 caliber revolver. John entered the house and found Helen in the kitchen. She was sitting at the breakfast table drinking her morning coffee. John walked up behind her. Without warning, he shot her once in the back of the head. She died instantly and slumped forward. John left her body there for the moment and went upstairs to the 3rd floor. His mother Alma was still in bed in her apartment. He shot her once above her left eye. She fell, breaking her knees as she collapsed. Alma was too heavy for John to move downstairs, so he put her body onto a carpet runner and placed her in a closet in her apartment. He then returned to the kitchen. John dragged Helen's body from the kitchen table through the house to the ballroom. The ballroom was a large, elegant room with high ceilings and beautiful details. It was meant for parties and gatherings. Now it would become the place where John would arrange all his victims. He placed Helen's body on a sleeping bag on the ballroom floor. He tried to clean up some of the blood in the kitchen, mopping and placing bloody towels in paper bags. After killing his wife and mother, John had several hours before his children would return from school. He drove to the post office and stopped the mail delivery to the house. He went to the bank and closed both his own and his mother's bank accounts. He returned home and fixed himself a sandwich for lunch. Then he waited for his children. Patricia was the first to arrive home. She had called from school saying she felt ill and needed to be picked up. John drove to get her and brought her home. As soon as they entered the house, he shot her in the jaw with the .22 revolver. She died quickly. John dragged her body to the ballroom and placed it on a sleeping bag next to her mother. 13-year-old Frederick arrived home next, shortly after his sister. John was waiting for him. As Frederick entered through the laundry room, John shot him in the back of the head with a single bullet. Frederick died instantly. John dragged his body to the ballroom and placed it with the others. John then drove to Westfield High School to watch his oldest son, John Jr., play in a soccer game. He sat in the stands and cheered for his son as if it was a normal afternoon. After the game ended, John gave his son a ride home. During the drive, John Jr. had no idea what awaited him. When they arrived at the house and entered the kitchen, John shot John Jr. in the back of the head. But unlike his siblings, John Jr. did not die right away. Evidence later showed that he tried to defend himself. There were misfires from the guns, indicating a struggle. John then shot his son multiple times with both the .22 revolver and the 9mm handgun. He fired at least 10 bullets into John Jr., shooting him in the chest and face, until his son was finally dead. John dragged his oldest son's body to the ballroom and placed it with the rest of his family. John then arranged all 4 bodies carefully in the ballroom. He placed sleeping bags under each of them. He covered some of their faces with towels, including Helen's and John Jr.'s faces. He left his mother's body upstairs in her 3rd-floor apartment because she was too heavy for him to carry down the stairs. John then did something very strange. He went through the entire 19-room mansion and cut his own face out of every single family photograph. He removed himself from wedding pictures, vacation photos, family portraits and snapshots. He wanted to erase his own image from the family's history. John then wrote several letters. He wrote to the children's schools, claiming they would be away visiting a sick relative in North Carolina. He called the milkman to cancel milk delivery. He called the newspaper to stop newspaper delivery. He wrote letters to several relatives. Most importantly, he wrote a 5-page confession letter to his pastor, Reverend Eugene Raywinkle. In the letter, John explained in detail what he had done and why. He wrote that he had originally planned to commit the murders on November 1st, which was All Saints' Day. He thought it would be an appropriate day for his family to go to heaven. But, he wrote, his travel arrangements had been delayed. He told the pastor that he believed he was sending his family's souls to heaven, where they would be safe from poverty and sin. He wrote that he could not commit suicide himself, because suicide was an unforgivable sin that would prevent him from eventually reuniting with his family in heaven. He ended the letter with a postscript, noting that his mother's body was in the hallway in the attic on the 3rd floor because she was too heavy to move. He asked to be removed from the church congregation rolls. Before leaving the house, John turned on every light in the mansion. He turned on the house's intercom system and played religious organ music throughout the rooms at high volume. He wanted it to appear that the family was home and everything was normal. This would delay the discovery of the bodies. He then gathered his belongings and walked out of Breeze Knoll for the last time. He drove his green 1963 Chevrolet Impala to John F. Kennedy Airport in New York and left it in the long-term parking lot. He did not board a plane. Instead, he took public transportation into the city and then caught a train. He was disappearing. The List family bodies lay undiscovered in the mansion for nearly a month. John's careful planning worked exactly as he had intended. The stopped mail and newspapers meant nothing piled up outside to draw attention. The school absences were explained by his phone calls. The lights burning day and night made neighbours think someone was home. But slowly, the lights began to burn out, one by one. Neighbours began to notice something seemed wrong. No one had actually seen any member of the List family since November 9th. Patricia's drama coach became particularly worried. According to later reports, Patricia had told her drama coach before the murders that if he ever heard the family had gone on vacation, it would mean her father had killed them all. When Patricia missed rehearsals, the coach drove past the house. He saw the lights on and assumed everything was fine, so he did not report his concerns. By early December, More people were becoming suspicious. The constant burning lights, the empty windows, the complete absence of any family members all created a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. On December 7th, 1971, family friends became particularly concerned about Alma, the elderly mother on the third floor. No one had seen her in weeks. The Westfield police were called to check on the family. Officers arrived at 431 Hillside Avenue that evening. When they entered the house, they heard organ music playing through the intercom system. The house was cold, despite the music and lights. In the ballroom, they found a scene of horror. 4 bodies lay on sleeping bags on the floor. Helen List and her 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick, had been dead for nearly a month. Their faces were covered. Following the directions in John's confession letter, officers went to the 3rd floor. There they found 84-year-old Alma's body in the closet where John had left it. Police immediately began investigating. They quickly identified John List as the suspect. His confession letter left no doubt about what had happened. An all-points bulletin was issued for his arrest. 3 days after the bodies were discovered, police found John's car at JFK Airport, but there was no record of him boarding any flight. The trail went cold immediately. Despite an extensive manhunt, John List had vanished. The funerals were held on December 11, 1971. The service took place at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Westfield, the same church where John had taught Sunday school. 5 hearses lined up outside. Reverend Ray Winkle, who had received John's confession letter, led the services. He called upon John to turn himself in. The pallbearers and many teenagers who had been friends with the List children cried as they carried the caskets. Helen and her 3 children were buried at Fairview Cemetery in Westfield. Their tombstone was inscribed with the words, "Peace in the Eternal Valley." Alma's body was flown to Frankenmuth, Michigan, where she was buried at St. Lorenz Lutheran Cemetery. Undercover police officers attended the funeral, hoping John might appear, but he never came. The List case shocked the quiet suburban community of Westfield. The town was filled with upper-middle-class families who believed they lived in a safe place. The discovery that a Sunday school teacher and Boy Scout leader had methodically murdered his entire family shattered that sense of security. The List mansion, Breeze Knoll, remained empty after the murders. 9 months later, in August 1972, the house was destroyed by fire. The fire was officially ruled as arson, but it was never solved and no suspects were ever identified. The fire destroyed everything, including the valuable Tiffany skylight that had been worth at least $100,000. A new house was eventually built on the site in 1974, but the memory of what happened there never faded. Children in Westfield reportedly refused to walk past the property. The case became local legend, and John List became known as the Boogeyman of Westfield. The FBI investigation discovered that John had travelled by train from New Jersey, first to Michigan and then to Colorado. He arrived in Denver in early 1972. He assumed a new identity, taking the name Robert Peter Clark. The real Robert Clark had been one of John's college classmates, though the real Robert Clark later said he had never actually known John well. Using this false name, John got a job as a cook at a Holiday Inn in Denver. He later found work as an accountant, which was his true profession. He lived quietly, growing a moustache and dressing more casually than he had in New Jersey, but otherwise making little attempt to disguise his appearance. In Denver, John joined a Lutheran church congregation and became active in church life. He ran a carpool for elderly church members who could not drive themselves. He met a woman named Dolores Miller at a church social gathering. She was an Army PX clerk. They dated and were married in 1985. Dolores had no idea who her husband really was. From 1979 to 1986, John worked as a comptroller at a paperbox manufacturing company outside Denver. In February 1988, John and Dolores moved to Midlothian, Virginia, a suburb of Richmond. John, still using the name Robert Clark, got a job as an accountant at a small accounting firm. He and Dolores lived in the Brandermill neighborhood. He attended church regularly and seemed to be a normal, respectable accountant and churchgoer. He had recreated almost exactly the same life he had led in New Jersey. For nearly 18 years, the List case remained unsolved. Some detectives thought John might have killed himself, unable to live with what he had done. Others thought he might have fled to Germany, where he had family and could speak the language from his time there during World War II. Some even speculated that he might be D.B. Cooper, the famous hijacker who parachuted from a plane with ransom money and was never found. But all leads went nowhere. The case grew cold and seemed destined to remain unsolved forever. In the late 1980s, a new generation of detectives looked at the case again. Detective Bernard Tracy from Westfield and Lieutenant Bernard Maranka decided to try something new. A television show called America's Most Wanted had begun airing in 1988. The show dramatized unsolved crimes and asked viewers to call in with tips if they recognized the suspects. The show had been successful in helping to capture several fugitives. Maranka approached the show about featuring the List case. At first, the producers turned it down because the case was too old. But the executive producer, Michael Linder, was scheduled to speak at a law enforcement conference. Maranka attended and brought the List case files with him. He showed them to Linder, who found the case fascinating. Linder agreed to air a segment about it. There was one problem. The murders had occurred 18 years earlier. No one knew what John List looked like now. He would be 63 years old. The producers contacted Frank Bender, a renowned forensic sculptor from Philadelphia. Bender specialized in creating age-progressed busts of fugitives and reconstructing faces from skeletal remains. He studied old photographs of John List. He considered List's hereditary traits, his German ancestry, his past eating and drinking habits, and how these factors would affect aging. He created a clay bust showing what he believed John List would look like at age 63. He showed List as a man wearing a suit and thick-framed glasses, still looking like an accountant. The America's Most Wanted segment aired on May 21, 1989. Host John Walsh introduced it as New Jersey's most famous murder case. The 10-minute dramatization reached an estimated 22 million viewers. John List himself was a regular viewer of America's Most Wanted. He enjoyed watching the show and trying to figure out the crimes. But on the night his case aired, he and Dolores had gone to a church social event, so he missed the episode that featured him. Someone else was watching though. A woman named Wanda Flannery was sitting in her home in Colorado. When she saw the bust that Frank Bender had created, she froze. She had once had a neighbor in Aurora, Colorado named Robert Clark, who looked almost exactly like the bust. Clark had been an accountant. He was always neat and wore suits. He attended church regularly. Flannery knew that Clark had recently moved to Virginia with his wife. Even though she thought the bust did not look exactly like Clark, she felt strongly that they were the same person. She knew she had to act, especially to protect Clark's wife Dolores, who might be in danger. She had her son-in-law call the America's Most Wanted tip line and provide the Clark's address in Virginia. More than 300 tips came in from viewers that night. FBI agents carefully followed up on the most promising leads. The tip about Robert Clark was one of them. On June 1, 1989, less than 2 weeks after the broadcast, FBI agents went to the accounting firm in Richmond, Virginia, where Robert Clark worked. They took him in for questioning. Robert Clark looked remarkably similar to Frank Bender's bust. The forensic sculptor had predicted that List would be wearing thick-framed glasses and a suit, and Robert Clark wore exactly those things. But Clark insisted he was not John List. He denied it repeatedly. The FBI took Clark's fingerprints. They compared them to John List's fingerprints from his military service records. The prints matched perfectly. Robert Clark was definitely John List. They also had evidence from the crime scene. Still, John continued to insist he was Robert Clark for several months. He was extradited from Virginia back to Union County, New Jersey. Finally, on February 16, 1990, faced with fingerprint evidence and all the evidence from the crime scene that he could not explain away, John confessed his true identity. His second wife Dolores was shocked and devastated. She had lived with this man for years, married to him since 1985, and had no idea he was a mass murderer. She had believed he was Robert Clark, a quiet, religious accountant. The revelation destroyed her world. John's trial began in early 1990. He was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. The trial lasted 7 days. The courtroom was packed with spectators, many of them Westfield residents who remembered the case or had known the List family. Prosecutors presented the 5-page confession letter John had written to his pastor. They called police officers who had discovered the bodies to testify about the crime scene. They introduced evidence about how methodically John had planned the murders. They showed how he had stopped the mail and newspapers, how he had written excuses to the schools, how he had left the lights and music on to delay discovery. John's defense attorneys argued that he had been suffering from mental illness at the time of the murders. They brought in a court-appointed psychiatrist who testified that John suffered from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. The psychiatrist said John had seen only two solutions to his financial problems: accept welfare assistance or kill his family. Welfare was unacceptable to John because of his authoritarian father's teachings about never accepting charity, and because he feared the shame and ridicule it would bring. The defense also argued that John suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder from his military service in World War II and Korea. John testified at his trial about his financial difficulties in 1971. He described how he had lost his job when the bank closed and how he could not bring himself to tell his family. He talked about sitting at the train station each day pretending to go to work. He described using his mother's money to pay bills. He talked about his wife's alcoholism and her untreated syphilis. But prosecutors argued that none of this justified murdering 5 innocent people. They pointed out that John had lived freely for 18 years under an assumed name, while his victims lay in graves. On April 12, 1990, after deliberating, the jury found John List guilty on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. He showed little reaction when the verdicts were read. He jerked his head slightly when the first guilty verdict was announced, but otherwise sat quietly. Jurors later said it had been a difficult verdict to reach. One told reporters, "The idea that a man could brutally kill 5 members of his family and not be completely crazy is very hard for people to grasp." The sentencing hearing was held on May 1, 1990. John's public defender asked for concurrent life sentences, arguing that the murders were a single tragic event by a troubled man. But prosecutor Eleanor Clark asked for the maximum sentence. She told the judge that John had brutally and methodically murdered 5 innocent people and then lived free for 18 years while showing no remorse. Judge William Wertheimer delivered a powerful statement before sentencing. He said that John Emil List was without remorse and without honour. He said that after 18 years, 5 months and 22 days, it was time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick and John Jr. to rise from the grave and demand justice. He called the case perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime he had handled in his thousands of cases on the bench. He said the defendant should have no hope of breathing the free air that graces the lives of law-abiding citizens. Judge Wertheimer sentenced John List to 5 consecutive life terms in prison. The consecutive nature of the sentences was critical. If they had been concurrent, John would have been eligible for parole in less than 15 years. But consecutive sentences meant he would have to serve each life term one after another. This made him ineligible for parole for approximately 125 years. At age 64, this effectively meant he would die in prison. Before being sentenced, John spoke briefly. He said in a strong voice that he remained truly sorry for the tragic events of 1971, but he said he felt that because of his mental state at the time, he was unaccountable for what happened. He did not take full responsibility for his actions. The judge was unpersuaded by this lack of remorse. John was sent to New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. He filed appeals of his conviction, arguing that his judgment had been impaired by post-traumatic stress disorder and that his confession letter to his pastor should not have been admissible as evidence because it was a confidential religious communication. A federal appeals court rejected both arguments and upheld his conviction and sentence. John List remained in prison for the rest of his life. In a 2002 interview with journalist Connie Chung, he was asked about his crimes. He said, "I wish I had never done what I did. I've regretted my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since." When asked why he had not killed himself, he said he believed suicide would have prevented him from going to heaven, where he hoped to be reunited with his family. He expressed his belief that when they all reached heaven, they would forgive him, or would not even realize what had happened. He said he believed they would like each other's company in heaven, just as they had on earth when times were better. This showed that even decades later, John still saw himself as the victim of circumstances, rather than taking full responsibility for his deliberate actions. On March 21, 2008, John List died of complications from pneumonia at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. He was 82 years old. He had spent his final 18 years in prison, the same amount of time he had spent as a fugitive. When the New Jersey Star-Ledger reported his death, they referred to him as the boogeyman of Westfield. He died without ever expressing genuine, full remorse for destroying his family. The case of John List remains one of the most notorious family murders in American history. It has been the subject of numerous documentaries, television programs and films. The 1987 thriller The Stepfather, and its 2009 remake were inspired by List's story. A 1993 TV movie called Judgment Day, the John List story, starred Robert Blake as List. The case was featured on shows like Law & Order, Forensic Files, and American Justice. The character Kaiser Soze in the 1995 film The Usual Suspects was also partly inspired by List's ability to vanish and create a new identity. The forensic bust created by Frank Bender became famous as one of the most accurate age progression sculptures ever made. In 2008, John Walsh, the host of America's Most Wanted, donated the bust to the National Museum of Crime and Punishment in Washington, D.C. The bust is now housed at the Alcatraz East Crime Museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. It stands as a testament to how forensic art helped bring a killer to justice after nearly 2 decades. The List case raised many questions about family annihilation, a rare but devastating category of murder where one family member kills all the others. Forensic psychologists have studied the case extensively. They note that List showed characteristics of what experts call the anomic family annihilator, someone who sees family members as symbols of social status rather than as individuals. When List lost his job and social position, his family became obstacles to the image he wanted to maintain, rather than people he loved. Some experts also identified elements of the disappointed annihilator in Patricia's murder, suggesting List wanted to punish his daughter for not living up to his rigid expectations. The case also highlighted the dangers of extreme religious rigidity combined with mental health issues and financial stress. List's twisted interpretation of religion allowed him to rationalize murder as mercy. He convinced himself that killing his family was an act of salvation rather than destruction. His inability to accept any solution that involved admitting failure or accepting help led him to see murder as his only option. The town of Westfield slowly healed from the trauma, but the case left a permanent mark on the community. The case prompted increased awareness about the importance of mental health services and the need for early intervention when families are in crisis. The memory of the murders remained vivid for decades. Even today, the case is remembered as one of New Jersey's most shocking crimes. The real victims of John List's actions were 5 innocent people whose lives were cut short. Alma List was 84 years old, an elderly woman who had lived a long life and deserved to spend her final years in peace. Helen List was 46 years old, struggling with illness and addiction, but still a human being who deserved help and compassion, not murder. Patricia List was only 16, just beginning to grow into adulthood and explore who she might become. John List Jr. was 15, fighting desperately for his life in his final moments, pumped full of bullets by the father who should have protected him. Frederick List was just 13, a young teenager with his whole life ahead of him, killed as soon as he walked in the door from school. Their lives mattered. Their deaths were not mercy, as their killer claimed, but murder in its most brutal, calculated form. John List had many options available to him in 1971. He could have told his family the truth about losing his job. He could have accepted welfare temporarily while he found new work. He could have sold the expensive mansion and moved to a smaller, more affordable home. He could have asked his church community for help. He could have declared bankruptcy, as many families did and do. He could have swallowed his pride and accepted that sometimes life does not go according to plan. Instead, he chose the most violent, selfish solution possible. He chose to kill everyone rather than face humiliation. He then lived freely for 18 years while his victims lay in their graves. The capture of John List proved that even after nearly 2 decades, justice could still be served. The combination of determined detectives who refused to give up, new technology in the form of forensic age progression art, and the power of television to reach millions of viewers all came together to end List's years of freedom. His case became one of America's Most Wanted's most famous captures, validating the show's approach to using media to solve cold cases. It showed that no matter how much time passes, families deserve justice, and society deserves to hold killers accountable. Today, the List murders serve as a chilling reminder that evil can hide behind a normal appearance. John List looked like a respectable accountant, a devoted church member, and a family man. But beneath that ordinary exterior was a man capable of methodical, cold-blooded murder. The case reminds us that financial problems, marital troubles, and personal failures are part of life for many people. But these challenges do not justify violence. It reminds us that rigid thinking, inability to ask for help, and distorted religious beliefs can combine into a dangerous mindset. And it reminds us that victims deserve to be remembered, not for how they died, but for who they were, and the lives they should have been able to live. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 3. Case number 3. Anthony Tote killed his wife Megan, his 3 children Alec, Tyler and Zoe, and the family dog Breezy in their home in Celebration, Florida, sometime in December 2019. The bodies were discovered on January 13, 2020, by federal agents and sheriff's deputies. Anthony had been living in the house with the decomposing bodies for weeks. He initially confessed to the murders, but later changed his story multiple times. On April 14, 2022, a jury found him guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty. The judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional year in county jail for killing the family dog. Anthony John Tote was born on September 17, 1975. When he was just 4 years old, he witnessed a horrific event that would shape his life. On March 19, 1980, when Anthony was living in Bensalem, Pennsylvania with his family, someone entered their home and shot his mother Loretta in the face while she was lying in bed. Anthony heard his mother scream. He told a detective years later that he saw a man wrestling with her on a bed. The bullet destroyed her left eye and remained lodged in her skull, but Loretta survived. The shooter was a 20-year-old man named John Chiamonte, a former student of Anthony's father, Robert Todd. Robert was a special education teacher and wrestling coach at Bensalem High School. Police investigation revealed that Robert had hired Chiamonte to kill his wife. Robert was having an affair with a 17-year-old girl and was engaged to a young nurse in a nearby town. He wanted his wife dead so he could marry his fiancée. Robert had already met the priest who had performed the wedding ceremony and had announced the engagement to his fiancée's family. Neither the fiancée nor her family knew that Robert was married, with a 4-year-old son living just a mile away. Robert gave Chiamonte a .32 caliber handgun and a key to the house. He paid him $800 to kill Loretta. Chiamonte, who had been drinking blackberry brandy and was high on drugs, entered the Todd house, went upstairs, and shot Loretta as she lay in bed. She jumped up with a start as he fired. The bullet took out her left eye. Chiamonte thought she was dead and fled. Police rushed Loretta to the hospital, where a skilled neurosurgeon saved her life. Robert Todt was arrested in July 1980 and charged with attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, and criminal solicitation. At trial in December 1980, Chiamonte testified against Robert in exchange for a reduced sentence. Robert took the stand in his own defense and maintained his innocence throughout the trial. Loretta stood by him during the trial, refusing to believe her husband was responsible. The jury found Robert guilty. He was initially sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. In 1984, his sentence was reduced to 5 to 10 years on appeal, though his conviction stood. He served about 10 years. Eventually, Loretta accepted the truth, divorced Robert, and remarried. She moved with her 2 children to Connecticut to start a new life. Anthony grew up in Connecticut after the attempted murder. He eventually attended college where he met Megan, who was studying to become a physical therapist and working as a yoga instructor to pay for her education. They dated for 2 years and then married. Anthony and Megan opened their own physical therapy clinic in Colchester, Connecticut, called Family Physical Therapy. The practice was also known as Performance Edge Sports. When Megan became pregnant with their first child, the couple decided that Anthony would run the practice while Megan stayed home to raise the children. Megan gave birth to 3 children. Alexander, called Alec, was born in 2006. Tyler was born in 2008. Zoe was born in 2015. The Todd family became active in their Connecticut community. The children were encouraged to participate in sports, music, and art. Alec and Tyler both became talented young musicians. Anthony volunteered as a youth soccer coach at the children's school. He also worked with disabled children. From the outside, the Toads appeared to be a happy, engaged family. In 2017, the family took a trip to Walt Disney World in Florida. According to Anthony, during this trip, Megan was bitten by a tick. She contracted Lyme disease from the bite. The illness caused her to suffer from bouts of severe depression. She became more reserved and withdrawn. She was no longer the energetic, active person she had been. Around this time, the Todd family decided to move to Celebration, Florida. Celebration is a planned community in Osceola County that was developed by the Walt Disney Company in the 1990s. The community is located near the Orlando theme parks and features pastel-coloured Victorian-style homes and pedestrian-friendly streets. It was designed to be a small-town utopia. Disney no longer owns the community, but its Disney affiliation gave it a reputation for manufactured perfection. Meghan and the 3 children moved to Celebration to live full-time. Anthony stayed in Connecticut to continue running the physical therapy practice. He would work Monday through Friday in Connecticut and then fly to Florida on weekends to spend time with his family. But serious problems were developing beneath the surface. Anthony's physical therapy business was in deep trouble. By 2019, Anthony had gained a significant amount of weight and was diagnosed with diabetes. More importantly, in April 2019, authorities discovered that Anthony had been committing healthcare fraud. He was charging insurance companies for treatments and care that he had never provided to patients. He was billing for services that never happened. An investigation by the FBI and the US Department of Health and Human Services revealed that Anthony had defrauded insurance providers of approximately $130,000. He was using the stolen money to pay for the family's home in Celebration and to pay for frequent trips to Walt Disney World for his family. The financial situation was dire. Court records from 3 different states showed that Anthony faced overwhelming debt. The physical therapy business owed nearly $200,000 in unpaid rent and other debts. A creditor had filed a lien against Anthony in the practice for $455,502 in unpaid obligations. Anthony had taken out loans from firms in New York City and was being sued for failure to pay. In total, the family's debts exceeded $500,000, and Anthony personally owed more than $100,000. The business was eventually evicted from its office space in November 2018 due to unpaid rent. In Florida, the family's financial problems continued. They had signed a 1-year lease in May 2019 for their Celebration home. By December 2019, they had missed a rental payment of more than $4,000. An eviction notice was filed against them. Anthony's physical therapy license in Connecticut had lapsed in September 2019. The family that had once appeared so successful and happy was drowning in debt with no way out. Prosecutors would later argue that Anthony saw no escape from his financial and legal problems and decided that killing his entire family was the only solution. Meghan and the children had no idea about the fraud or the mounting debts. They were completely uninvolved with the business side of the physical therapy practice. Every year, the Todd family would normally return to Connecticut from Florida during the winter months because the children loved the snow and enjoyed winter sports. But in 2019, they remained in Celebration. This was unusual and would later raise concerns among family members. The murders occurred sometime between December 14, 2019 and late December. The exact date has never been definitively established because of how decomposed the bodies were when they were found. According to Anthony's confession to detectives in January 2020, he and Meghan had been watching videos online about the apocalypse and the afterlife. He claimed they developed a death pact based on a belief that the world was ending and that they needed to die together to pass over to the other side. He said they decided that the entire family should die so they could all be together in the afterlife. Anthony told investigators that the family was given Benadryl to make everyone drowsy. Benadryl is an over-the-counter allergy medication whose generic name is diphenhydramine. In large amounts, it can cause sedation and can be toxic. According to Anthony's confession, he went to 4-year-old Zoe's room while she was sleeping. He weighed 250 pounds. He said he sat with her for a time, then rolled on top of her and suffocated her. He put his hand over her mouth and laid on her to keep her down. He placed a pillow on top of her face. He later told detectives he held the pillow on her face for 10 to 15 minutes until she died. Next, according to his confession, he killed 13-year-old Alec. He suffocated Alec and then stabbed him. Then he killed 11-year-old Tyler in the same way, suffocating him and then stabbing him. Anthony also killed the family dog Breezy by suffocating the animal. Meghan was the last to die. Anthony told detectives that Meghan had tried to stab herself in an attempt to commit suicide, but her self-inflicted wounds had failed to kill her. He claimed she asked him to suffocate her to finish what she had started. According to his confession, he put his hands over her mouth and placed a pillow on top of her until she stopped moving. He said he held it there until there was no motion left. After everyone was dead, Anthony moved all the bodies to the master bedroom. He placed them on beds and covered them with blankets. He put crucifixes in their hands. Then Anthony did something truly disturbing. He continued living in the house with the bodies. He slept in the same master bedroom where his dead wife and children lay decomposing. He made multiple trips to nearby grocery stores, apparently buying single servings of food for himself. Neighbours noticed his solitary presence and his peculiar behaviour. The windows of the house were darkened. Anthony had sealed the garage door with plastic sheeting, apparently to prevent the smell of decomposition from escaping and alerting neighbours. Anthony also told detectives that he attempted suicide multiple times during the weeks he lived with the bodies. He said he took large amounts of Benadryl trying to kill himself. He said he tried using knives and zip ties around his neck. He said he wanted to die and be with his family, but all his suicide attempts failed. As December turned into January, Anthony's sister, Chrissy Caplet, became increasingly worried. She lived in Connecticut and had been trying to reach Megan and the children around Christmas time. No one was answering phone calls or text messages. Megan, who was typically very active on social media and regularly posted updates about the family, had gone completely silent online. This was very unusual. Anthony gave misleading explanations to relatives. He told some family members that Megan and the children were visiting family in New York. He told others they were all sick with the flu. But as more time passed with no contact, concerns grew. On December 29, 2019, Chrissy requested a welfare check. Deputies from the Osceola County Sheriff's Office went to the Todd home. They knocked on the door but received no response from anyone inside. They looked around the property but saw no obvious signs of trouble. The officers did not believe the situation rose to a level of suspicion that would justify forcing entry into the home, so they left. As the situation dragged on, extended family members were so worried that they created a Facebook group called Looking for the Todd Family to try to piece together information. The group quickly grew to nearly 2,500 members. People shared what they knew and tried to figure out where the family could be. Strangely, no one ever filed an official missing persons report for Megan or the children. Meanwhile, federal agents investigating Anthony for healthcare fraud were also trying to locate him. On January 9, 2020, federal agents from the Department of Health and Human Services contacted the Osceola County Sheriff's Office about the Connecticut investigation into Anthony. Over the next few days, deputies made several attempts to contact Anthony at his home, but could not reach him. On January 13, 2020, federal agents and Osceola County deputies returned to the Todd home with an arrest warrant for Anthony on the healthcare fraud charges. They had been staking out the house for hours that morning. Around midday, they saw Anthony walk out onto the porch. He appeared to struggle to walk and was convulsing. Before they could execute the arrest, he walked back inside the house. The agents and deputies decided they needed to enter the home. They obtained a key from the property's landlord and entered through the front door. Immediately, they were hit by an overwhelming, foul odour. One of the first things they noticed was that Anthony was barely able to stand and appeared to be shaking strangely. They asked him where his wife was. Anthony told them that Megan was upstairs sleeping. He even called out her name, as if she was alive and would respond. But Megan was not sleeping. The agents and deputies went upstairs to the master bedroom. There they found a scene of horror. The bodies of Megan, Alec, Tyler and Zoe were in the bedroom, in various stages of decomposition. Alec and Tyler's bodies were on a mattress. Megan's body was in the marital bed, with 4-year-old Zoe's body at the foot of the bed beneath her mother's feet. Zoe had decomposed so severely that authorities initially could not find her body until they examined Megan's corpse more closely and saw Zoe beneath her feet. All the bodies were covered with blankets. The family dog Breezy was lying dead on the floor in her dog bed in the master bedroom. Federal law enforcement officer Michael Phelps later testified that the bodies were discoloured, black and blue. The smell was overpowering. It was immediately clear that the family had been dead for a long time, certainly not just a day or two. A medical examiner later determined that the victims had been dead for at least a couple of weeks, possibly longer. Anthony was wearing only a shirt and underwear. He told paramedics that he had taken an unknown amount of Benadryl in an attempt to commit suicide. He was taken to a hospital for evaluation. He was extremely weak from his suicide attempt and the weeks he had spent living with minimal food in the house with the decomposing bodies. The Osceola County Sheriff's Office arrested Anthony and charged him with 4 counts of premeditated first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty for killing the family dog. He was held without bond. On January 13th and 15th, 2020, Anthony was interviewed by detectives. During these interviews, he confessed to killing his entire family. He described in detail how he had suffocated each family member and stabbed some of them. He explained his belief that the world was ending and that everyone needed to die to pass over to the other side together. He said it was a death pact between him and Megan. But then Anthony's story began to change. In June 2020, while in the Osceola County Jail, Anthony wrote a 27-page letter to his father, Robert. In the letter, he completely changed his account of what happened. He now claimed that his wife Megan had killed the children, not him. He wrote that when he came home that day, Megan told him she had given the children what he called Benadryl pudding pie to drug them. He claimed she then stabbed and suffocated each child while he was away from the house. According to this new story, Megan then drank a bottle of Benadryl and stabbed herself in the stomach in front of him. He wrote that he tried to perform CPR but could not save her. He claimed he had falsely confessed to the murders because he wanted to cover up what his wife had done and take the blame for her. This letter was obtained by the Orlando Sentinel through a public records request, and its contents were published. Anthony would later sue the jail, claiming the letter should not have been made public. The bodies were examined by Associate Medical Examiner Dr. Jennifer Nara. She determined that all 4 family members died from homicidal violence of unspecified means in association with diphenhydramine toxicity. Diphenhydramine is the generic name for Benadryl. All the victims had toxic levels of Benadryl in their systems. Megan, Alec and Tyler all had stab wounds to their abdomens. The bodies were so severely decomposed that the medical examiner could not determine the exact sequence of events or the precise cause of death for each victim. The examiner could not definitively say whether they had been suffocated first and then stabbed, or stabbed first and then suffocated, or whether the Benadryl overdose alone could have killed them. This uncertainty would become a key issue at trial. Anthony pleaded not guilty to all charges. His trial was originally scheduled for January 2022, but began on April 11, 2022, in Osceola County Court. He was now 46 years old. In opening statements, Assistant State Attorney Danielle Pennell laid out the prosecution's case. She told the jury that Anthony and Megan had a death pact based on their belief that the apocalypse was coming. She said that sometime between December 14, 2019 and Christmas, Anthony went into Zoe's room while she was asleep, sat with her, and then rolled his 250-pound body on top of her until she suffocated. She described how he then killed Alec by suffocating and stabbing him, followed by Tyler in the same manner. She explained that Megan was last and that Anthony claimed she had tried to stab herself, but the wounds were not fatal, so he suffocated her at her request. Pennell told the jury that Anthony had confessed to all of this, and that he said he then moved all the bodies to the master bedroom, where he continued living with them for weeks. She argued that the motive was control. Anthony wanted control over when his family's lives would end. The prosecution played video recordings of Anthony's confessions to detectives from January 2020. In the videos, jurors watched Anthony describe in his own words how he had killed each family member. They heard him say he put his hands over Zoe's mouth and placed a pillow on top of her. They heard him describe suffocating and stabbing his sons. They heard him explain the death pact with his wife and his belief in the apocalypse. The defense team, led by public defender Alicia Smith, chose to defer their opening statement until after the prosecution rested its case. When it was their turn to present evidence, the defense called only one witness, Anthony himself. On the witness stand on April 13, 2022, Anthony told a completely different story from his confession. He testified that he did not kill his family. Instead, he claimed that Megan had killed the children and herself. He said that on the day of the murders, he went to a nearby condo that the family owned to do maintenance tasks. He said he also went to get the silver Mickey Mouse necklace that his daughter Zoe had been begging for. When he returned home, he said, he found his children dead in their beds, with no sign of struggle. He claimed his wife calmly asked him if he was okay. He said he responded, "No, you murdered our children." He testified that Megan then stabbed herself in the stomach in their bedroom and drank a bottle of Benadryl. He claimed he tried to perform CPR until he physically could not anymore, but she died. Anthony testified that he then moved the bodies to comfortable sleeping positions and covered them for warmth and protection. He said he placed rosaries in their hands. He said he was not there the night his children died. He told the jury, crying, "I came home and my kids were dead." When asked about his confessions to detectives, Anthony claimed he could not remember making them. He said he had fallen down some steps and hit his head. He also said he was suicidal and suffering from a Benadryl overdose when he gave the confessions, and that he had made the confessions under duress. He claimed he had initially confessed because he wanted to cover for his wife and take responsibility for her actions. The prosecution cross-examined Anthony aggressively. They pointed out all the contradictions between his testimony and his detailed confessions. They noted that his story kept changing. They pointed out that the medical examiner's findings were consistent with his confession, not with his new story. They reminded the jury that he had told detectives very specific details about how he killed each family member, details that he could not have known if his wife had committed the murders while he was away. The prosecution argued that the real motive was Anthony's desperate financial situation. He was facing criminal charges for healthcare fraud. He owed more than $100,000. His family was being evicted from their home. His professional and personal life was collapsing. Rather than face the shame and consequences, he decided to kill everyone. The defense argued that there was reasonable doubt. They pointed out that the medical examiner could not determine the exact cause of death and could not say with certainty who had inflicted the fatal injuries. They argued that the evidence did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Anthony was the killer rather than Megan. After closing arguments on April 14, 2022, the jury began deliberating around noon. The deliberations went on for more than 6 hours. At one point, the jury sent a note to the judge saying they were deadlocked on at least one of the counts. Judge Keith Carston read them what is called an Allen charge, which instructs jurors to continue discussing the case and allows those in the minority to reconsider their positions. The jury returned to deliberations. Around 6:50 p.m, the jury returned with a verdict. Anthony sat quietly, his hands clasped. The forewomen read the verdicts one by one. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Megan Tott. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Alec Tott. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Tyler Tott. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Zoe Tott. Guilty of animal cruelty in the death of Breezy. Anthony shook his head as each verdict was read. He had been found guilty on all counts. Anthony addressed the court before sentencing. He said, "I maintain my innocence. I love my wife. I love my children. I was not there the night my children died." His words had no effect. Judge Carston then delivered a powerful statement. He told Anthony, "You, Anthony John Tott, are a destroyer of worlds. That you destroyed the world of your 4-year-old daughter, Zoe Elizabeth Tott. That you destroyed the world of your 11-year-old son, Tyler John Tott. That you destroyed the world of your 13-year-old son, Alexander Robert Tott. That you destroyed the world of your 42-year-old wife, Megan Marie Tott." The judge sentenced Anthony to 4 consecutive sentences of life in prison without the possibility of parole for the 4 murders. He added 1 year in county jail for the animal cruelty charge. The consecutive nature of the sentences meant Anthony would spend the rest of his life in prison with no chance of ever being released. The state attorney's office had previously decided not to seek the death penalty. Former state attorney Aramis Ayala had cited serious concerns regarding Anthony's mental health as the reason for not pursuing capital punishment. After the verdict, state attorney Monique Worrell issued a statement saying, "There are no words that adequately express the utter tragedy that is this case. This verdict brings a painful chapter in our community to a close. I know that this result cannot ease the suffering of those who loved Megan, Zoe, Alexander, and Tyler Tott." On April 19, 2022, less than a week after his conviction, Anthony filed a notice of appeal. His attorneys argued that several of Judge Carston's rulings had been erroneous, including the fact that the defense was not allowed to discuss Anthony's mental health at trial. The appeals process would take years to resolve. A funeral service for Megan, Alec, Tyler and Zoe was held on January 31, 2020 at St. John the Evangelist Church in Montville, Connecticut, Megan's hometown parish. The family presented collages with hundreds of photos from their lives at a reception afterward. Friends and family members remembered Megan as a loving mother who homeschooled her children and was devoted to their well-being. They remembered Alec and Tyler as talented young musicians. Their music teacher, Bobby Sedgwick, said they were remarkably skilled for their ages. 4-year-old Zoe was remembered as a bright, happy little girl. On January 20, 2020, the Celebration community held a candlelight vigil at Celebration Lakeside Park. Over 100 people attended, including friends, neighbours, and community members who wanted to show their support and grief. A pastor from the local community church led prayers and tributes. He said, "We are here tonight to stand together. Their deaths in some way have diminished our lives." The gathering reflected the shock and sadness that had gripped the normally peaceful community. Christina Geraghty, a Celebration resident, watched her young son process the loss of his two close friends Alec and Tyler. She struggled to help him understand how their father could have been charged with their murders. Many in Celebration found it difficult to reconcile the friendly soccer coach and engaged father they thought they knew with the man who had committed such a horrific crime. The Tote case became only the second murder case in Celebration's 26-year history. The community had been designed and developed by Disney to be an idyllic small town, and residents had believed they lived in a safe, perfect place. The discovery of what happened in the Tote home shattered that sense of security. The case drew national attention, not only because of the horrific nature of the crimes, but also because of the disturbing parallel to what had happened 40 years earlier. Anthony's father, Robert, had attempted to have Anthony's mother killed when Anthony was just 4 years old. Now Anthony had killed his own wife and children. The two cases, separated by 4 decades, both involved men who chose violence against their families when facing personal crises. Alan Rubenstein, who was now a judge in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, had prosecuted Robert Tott's case in 1980. When he learned that Robert's son had been charged with murdering his own family, Rubenstein was shocked. He told reporters, "That's a phone call you don't get very often." He reflected on the strange twist of fate that connected the two cases across generations. "You just can't make this stuff up," he said. Robert Tott himself, still maintaining his innocence in his own case, acknowledged that his son had witnessed the shooting of his mother. He said, "There's only so much trauma a young kid can take at that point." He suggested that witnessing that violence at such a young age may have affected Anthony deeply, though he offered this observation while still denying his own guilt in the 1980 attempted murder. Anthony is currently serving his sentence at Santa Rosa Correctional Institution in Milton, Florida. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. He is now in his late 40s and will die in prison. The victims of Anthony Tott's crimes were innocent people who deserved to live. Megan Tott was 42 years old, a devoted mother who homeschooled her children and tried to build a good life for her family despite her health struggles. Alec was 13, a talented young musician with his whole future ahead of him. Tyler was 11, another gifted child who loved music and his friends. Zoe was only 4 years old, a little girl who loved Disney and playing with her brothers. Even the family dog Breezy was an innocent victim of Anthony's actions. Anthony's story, like that of many family annihilators, involved multiple stresses converging at once. He faced massive debt and imminent bankruptcy. He was under criminal investigation for healthcare fraud that could send him to prison. His family was being evicted from their home. His professional reputation was destroyed. His marriage may have been under strain due to all these pressures, but none of these circumstances justified or excused what he did. Millions of people face financial problems, legal troubles, and personal stress without murdering their families. Anthony had many other options. He could have declared bankruptcy. He could have faced the fraud charges and served whatever sentence he received. He could have been honest with his wife about their financial situation. He could have asked for help from family or friends. Instead, he chose the most violent, irreversible solution possible. The claim that he and Megan had a death pact based on apocalyptic beliefs was never corroborated by any evidence from Megan's life. There was no record of her sharing such beliefs with anyone else. Her social media posts and communications with friends and family showed no indication that she believed the world was ending or that her family should die together. The jury rejected Anthony's story that Megan had killed the children and herself. The evidence and his own detailed confessions pointed to him as the sole killer. The case serves as a grim reminder that family violence can happen anywhere, even in communities designed to be perfect and safe. It shows that the facade of a happy family can hide deep troubles that are kept secret from the outside world. It reminds us that financial stress and legal problems, while serious, are never justification for violence, and it shows the devastating ripple effects when one person chooses to destroy an entire family. Friends, extended family members, neighbours, and an entire community were left to grieve and to struggle with questions that can never be fully answered. Anthony Tote destroyed 5 lives that day in December 2019. He destroyed his wife, who had loved him and built a life with him. He destroyed 3 innocent children who trusted him as their father and protector. He destroyed a family pet that depended on him, and he destroyed his own life as well. ensuring he would spend every remaining day in a prison cell. 4 consecutive life sentences mean he will never breathe free air again. As Judge Carsten said, Anthony Todt truly was a destroyer of worlds. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 4. Case number 4. Robert Bever and his younger brother Michael Bever killed their parents and 3 of their siblings in their home in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, on the night of July 22, 2015. Robert was 18 years old, and Michael was 16 years old at the time of the murders. They stabbed their father David, their mother April, and their brothers Daniel, Christopher, and their sister Victoria to death. They also attacked their 13-year-old sister Crystal, who survived. Their youngest sister Autumn, who was 2 years old, was not harmed. The 5 victims suffered a combined total of 141 stab wounds. Robert pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill on September 7, 2016. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Michael was tried as an adult and found guilty on May 9, 2018. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms plus 28 years, with the possibility of parole after serving 225 years, which effectively means he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Robert Davis Bever was born on September 17, 1996. Michael John Bever was born on November 4, 1998. They grew up in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, a suburb of Tulsa. The Bever family consisted of parents David and April and their 7 children. David Bever was 52 years old and worked to support his large family. April Bever was 44 years old. The children ranged in age from 2 to 18 years old. The family lived at 709 Magnolia Court in a quiet residential neighborhood. The Bever parents homeschooled all of their children. Neighbors reported that the family was very reclusive and kept the children from interacting with other kids in the neighborhood or with neighbors. The family's lifestyle was so private that some neighbors did not even know the full names of all the family members until after the murders, when the medical examiner released the names publicly. The family was so inconspicuous that people in the community knew very little about them, despite living nearby for years. Some neighbors did report noticing strange and unsettling behavior from Robert and Michael over time, though the specifics of this behavior were not detailed publicly. The family rarely left their home, and the children were seldom seen playing outside. This extreme isolation would later become a focus of discussion about whether warning signs had been missed. Defense attorneys would later claim during the legal proceedings that David Bever had been physically and verbally abusive toward his children. Crystal Bever, the surviving sister, testified about this alleged abuse. Robert also claimed that both of his parents were abusive to him and his siblings. He said his parents would often talk about people they hated and would refer to the biblical Armageddon as a retribution for everything they despised about the world. However, investigators said they found no evidence to support claims that abuse was occurring in the Bever home. Robert and Michael had been planning to kill their family for a long time. According to Robert's own statements to police, he had been thinking about killing his family since he was only 13 years old. It was not until years later that he discovered his younger brother Michael also had thoughts about murder. The 2 brothers found they shared a dark fascination with violence and death. The brothers were obsessed with serial killers. They studied famous killers and mass murderers. Robert told police that he admired serial killers and wanted to become one himself. The brothers planned not only to kill their family, but to go on a massive killing spree afterward. They hoped their crimes would rival and even surpass the 1999 Columbine High School massacre and the 2012 Aurora movie theater shooting in Colorado. Robert stated that he wanted to achieve a body count of up to 500 people or more. He said they planned to strike in multiple locations outside of Oklahoma. The brothers spent months preparing for their planned massacre. Robert got a job at a religious call center specifically to earn money to buy weapons, body armor, helmets, bullets, and guns. The brothers ordered body armor online and collected knives for months. Robert told detectives he found out he could order guns and have them delivered to a gun shop. He ordered ammunition to be delivered to their home the day after they planned to kill their family. When police later searched the Bever home, they found a hatchet, multiple knives, darts, and a surgical blade. They also found bulletproof vests, neck protectors, black masks, and shin guards. The brothers had wireless cameras set up throughout the house. Robert admitted that he and Michael set up these cameras to record their murders. Robert told police he planned to create 2 videos. One video would show the gory aftermath, including the bodies of their family members. This version would only be seen by police and prosecutors. The other video would show the crime scene without the bodies and would be posted online for the world to see. According to Michael's later written statement to police, the specific planning for the murders began on June 30th, 2015, when Robert told him his plan to kill everyone in the house and then go on a killing spree across the United States. Michael wrote that he thought it was a great idea and agreed to join his brother. Over the next 3 weeks, the brothers finalised their plans. The attack began late in the evening of July 22, 2015. The brothers put their plan into action around midnight. According to Michael's written confession, they invited their 13-year-old sister Crystal into their room. Michael distracted her while Robert came up behind her and slit her throat with a knife. He then stabbed her from behind. Crystal screamed and ran to warn the rest of the family. Their mother, April, heard the screaming and came into the room to help Crystal. Robert stabbed April repeatedly. Crystal, despite her serious injuries, managed to run out of the house. She got outside and collapsed in the driveway, but the brothers followed her outside and dragged her back into the house. She was severely wounded with cuts to her throat and stab wounds all over her body, but she remained conscious. The attack then spread throughout the house as family members realised what was happening. April Bever fought back desperately to protect her children. She was stabbed nearly 50 times. She suffered blunt force trauma as well as the multiple stab wounds to her head, neck, torso, arms and hands. David Bever was stabbed at least 28 times, with wounds to his torso, face, neck, left arm and hand. Some of the younger children tried to lock themselves in a bathroom to escape. Michael later wrote in his confession that he begged them to let him in, pretending he was there to help them. Tragically, they trusted him and opened the door. The brothers then attacked them. 12-year-old Daniel Bever was stabbed 21 times to his back, shoulder and chest. But before he died, Daniel managed to call 911. At approximately 11:30 p.m. on July 22, 2015, a 911 dispatcher received a call from the Bever home at 709 Magnolia Court. The dispatcher heard a young voice, so quiet it was initially thought to be a female. The caller said, "Help." The dispatcher asked where the caller was located. The young voice said, "Broken Arrow, Oklahoma." The dispatcher asked who was attacking the family. The caller said, "My brother's attacking my family." When asked which brother, the caller said, "Michael." Then the dispatcher heard screaming, commotion, and deeper male voices in the background. The line went dead. During that call, the brothers found Daniel and attacked him. He was killed while on the phone with 911. 7-year-old Christopher Bever was stabbed 21 times to his back, chest, shoulder and lower leg. 5-year-old Victoria Bever was stabbed 23 times to both sides of her neck, her chest, her back and her upper arm. These young children had no chance to defend themselves against their older brothers. The medical examiner determined that all 5 victims died from multiple sharp force injuries. The autopsies revealed that the victims died between the late hours of July 22nd and the early hours of July 23rd, 2015. The combined total of stab wounds across all 5 victims was 141. 2-year-old Autumn was in the house during the attack but was not harmed. The brothers apparently did not attack her because of her very young age. Broken Arrow police received the 911 call at 11:33 p.m. Officers were dispatched immediately to 709 Magnolia Court. The first officer to arrive at the scene was Officer Brandon Tenner. When he approached the house, he saw blood outside near the front door. He immediately knew something terrible had happened. As he got closer, he heard a faint voice calling for help. It was 13-year-old Crystal Bever. Crystal was barely alive and drifting in and out of consciousness, but she managed to tell Officer Tenner what had happened. She identified her own brothers, Robert and Michael, as the attackers. Officer Tenner radioed this information to other responding officers. He sat with Crystal until backup arrived and it was safe to enter the house. He did not expect her to survive her injuries, so he knew he needed to get as much information from her as possible while she could still speak. When more officers arrived and entered the house, they found a scene of horror. Blood was everywhere. Officers found bodies throughout the house. They found one victim in a bedroom off the kitchen. They found 2 small children in a bathroom. They found victims upstairs. All were dead. At 12:05 a.m. on July 23rd, officers confirmed 5 fatalities. As police were discovering the bodies, Robert and Michael Bever slipped out the back door of the house and fled into a wooded area behind the property. Police officers heard them leaving as they were entering the front of the house. Police immediately began searching for the suspects. A police tracking dog picked up the brothers' scent. At approximately 12:14 a.m., just over 40 minutes after the initial 911 call, the police dog tracked Robert and Michael Bever to a location about 200 yards southwest of their home in the woods. The brothers were found hiding together. They were covered in blood and dirt. Both were arrested without resistance. Officers took photographs of the brothers immediately after their arrest. Pictures of Michael showed him without shoes, wearing a ripped shirt, covered in what appeared to be blood and mud. Pictures of Robert showed him also covered in blood and wearing an armoured vest. The brothers were taken into custody and transported to the Broken Arrow Police Department for questioning. Detective Eric Bentz interviewed both brothers after their arrest. During the interviews, Robert laughed while describing the attacks. He told detectives that killing more than one person made him feel like a god. He showed no remorse. He was cold and calculating as he described what he and his brother had done. He confessed to everything. Robert told investigators that he and Michael had planned to harm many more people after killing their family. They planned to steal the family car and drive to different cities. At each location, they would shoot and kill 5 random people. They wanted to be famous for their crimes. Robert said they wanted their massacre to rival Columbine and Aurora. He said they had been collecting weapons and body armour for months in preparation. Michael also gave statements to police. In a written confession, he described how the planning began and how the attack unfolded. He explained that some siblings had locked themselves in a bathroom and that he had begged them to let him in, pretending to be there to help. When they opened the door, he and Robert attacked them. On July 31, 2015, Robert and Michael Bever were formally charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill. The murder charges were for the deaths of David Bever, April Bever, Daniel Bever, Christopher Bever, and Victoria Bever. The assault charge was for the attack on Crystal Bever. On August 3, 2015, the brothers were arraigned by video and both pleaded not guilty to all charges. Their defense attorneys filed motions requesting that certain records, including the 911 audio recording, be kept sealed from public view. A judge ruled that a transcript of the 911 call must be released, but the audio itself would remain sealed. The judge said he had listened to the audio and it was too gruesome to release to the public. Under Oklahoma law, anyone aged 15 to 17 who is charged with first-degree murder must be tried as an adult. Michael's attorney, Rob Nye, filed a motion arguing that Michael should be prosecuted as a juvenile instead of as an adult. He argued that sentencing Michael to life in prison was effectively the same as the death penalty for a juvenile. He said Michael should be given a chance at rehabilitation. In December 2015, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals issued an opinion siding with the state's decision to prosecute Michael as an adult. The appeal was denied. Robert Bever's case moved forward separately from Michael's. Robert's attorneys Mark Henriksen and Cheryl Ramsey worked on his defense. Tulsa County District Attorney Steve Kunzweiler had to decide whether to seek the death penalty against Robert. Under Oklahoma law, first-degree murder carries a punishment of either life imprisonment or the death penalty. However, Michael could not face the death penalty because he was under 18 at the time of the murders. In June 2016, while in the Tulsa County Jail, Robert attempted to hang himself with a sheet. He survived the suicide attempt and was placed in the medical unit segregated from his brother. On September 7, 2016, Robert Bever appeared in court and entered a plea agreement with the district attorney's office. He pleaded guilty to all 6 counts against him. In exchange for his guilty plea, the district attorney agreed not to seek the death penalty. Robert stood before District Judge Sharon Holmes and admitted that he and his brother had worked together to kill their parents and 3 siblings. He admitted they had intended to kill Crystal as well. Judge Holmes sentenced Robert to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the 5 murder counts. For the assault and battery with intent to kill charge, she sentenced him to an additional life term, also to run consecutively. Robert was also ordered to pay a $1,000 fine and a $1,000 Victims' Compensation Act assessment on each of the 6 counts. The consecutive nature of the sentences meant Robert would never be eligible for parole. He would spend every remaining day of his life in prison. District Attorney Kunzweiler explained his decision to accept the plea deal. He said the most important factor in his decision was the needs of the two surviving children, Crystal and Autumn. He said those children had lost everything and deserved to move on with their lives without the continued trauma of a trial and decades of death penalty appeals. Kunzweiler said, "While I believe that Robert Bever deserves the death penalty for his savage actions, I feared that a death penalty prosecution would result in his teenage sister being forced to recount and relive the brutal details of the carnage that her brothers wrought again and again." He said the surviving teenage child had requested that he make sure Robert Bever never got out of prison. The plea deal guaranteed that. Kunzweiler told reporters, "We will not speak of him again. He will not be breathing free air from now on." Robert's attorney, Mark Henriksen, said their goal had been to avoid the death penalty, and they had achieved that goal. He made a cryptic statement to reporters saying, "This is a tragedy of immeasurable dimension. However, our client will probably have an easier life in the penitentiary than he had at home." This comment seemed to reference the defence's claim about abuse in the home, though no evidence of such abuse was ever presented. Michael's case proceeded to trial. His trial began on April 16, 2018, nearly 3 years after the murders. The trial lasted about 4 weeks. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Steve Kunzweiler. The defense was led by Attorney Corbin Brewster. During the trial, prosecutors presented extensive evidence. They showed the jury photographs of the crime scene, though the most graphic images were not shown publicly. They played portions of Michael's police interview and read his written confession. They presented a journal that Michael had kept while in jail. One entry in the journal read, "Once upon a time, there were 2 brothers named Michael and Robert. They hated their family, so they killed them. The end." The journal also contained drawings and notes. One page had "Hail Satan" written on it. Another had a drawing of a swastika with "White Power" written underneath. The jury heard the 911 call that Daniel Bever made before he was killed. They heard Daniel's young voice saying, "My brother's attacking my family," and calling out Michael's name before the line went dead. This was devastating evidence that showed Michael's direct involvement. The prosecution's star witness was Crystal Bever, now 16 years old. She had survived the attack and had to face her brother Michael in court. She testified about what happened that night. She described how she was invited into her brother's room, how Robert attacked her from behind while Michael distracted her, how she tried to warn the family, how she was dragged back into the house after escaping outside. Her testimony was emotional and powerful. Robert also testified at Michael's trial, but his testimony was confusing and contradictory. He told the jury he wanted to take full responsibility for all the deaths. He said he had lied to police about Michael's involvement. He claimed he did not see Michael attack anyone. However, he also testified that Michael knew about the plans to kill the family before the attack. He also said Michael had tricked 3 of their siblings into opening locked doors after they tried to hide from the brothers. This testimony actually contradicted his claim that Michael was not involved. The defense argued that Michael was caught up in his mentally ill brother's fantasy. Defense attorney Corbin Brewster told jurors that Michael had gotten swept up in Robert's delusions. He argued that the jury could not be certain beyond a reasonable doubt that Michael was the one who committed the killings, rather than Robert alone. The defense pointed out that the bodies were so badly injured and there was so much chaos that it was difficult to determine exactly who had done what. They said there were holes and gaps in the evidence that created reasonable doubt. Michael did not testify in his own defense. After more than 5 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on May 9, 2018. They found Michael Bever guilty on all counts. He was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill. The sentencing phase began after the guilty verdicts. The jury had to decide what sentence to recommend to the judge. They recommended 5 consecutive life sentences with the possibility of parole for the murder counts and 28 additional years for the assault count. Under this recommendation, Michael would be eligible for parole only after serving all 5 life sentences plus 28 years. Since a life sentence in Oklahoma is effectively 45 years, this meant Michael would need to serve 225 years plus 28 years, totaling 253 years before becoming eligible for parole. Given Michael's age at the time, this effectively meant he would spend his entire life in prison. Judge Sharon Holmes was not required to follow the jury's recommendation. She could have imposed a lighter sentence. She initially delayed imposing the formal sentence to give herself more time to consider the case. On August 9, 2018, Judge Holmes imposed the jury's recommended sentence. Michael Beaver was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms plus 28 years with the possibility of parole after 225 years. The sentence ensured Michael would spend the rest of his life behind bars. District Attorney Kunzweiler described Robert as delusional, with grandiose ideas about himself. He said Robert had serious mental health issues. However, Kunzweiler said Michael was different. He described Michael as cold and calculating. He said he detected no mental health issues with Michael. Kunzweiler never accepted the defense argument that Michael was just a follower. He believed Michael was a willing and active participant in the murders. Michael's attorneys appealed both the conviction and the sentence. They argued that several of the trial judge's rulings had been erroneous. In particular, they argued that Michael should have been given a chance at rehabilitation, rather than being sentenced to die in prison. They pointed out that the jury had recommended the possibility of parole, showing that even the jurors believed there should be some chance for Michael in the future. In June 2020, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals issued a ruling on the appeal. In a 3-2 decision, the court upheld Michael's conviction and sentence. The majority ruled that the trial had been conducted properly and the sentence was appropriate. However, 2 judges dissented. They noted that Michael's term of incarceration was contrary to the jury's wishes and appeared to violate the spirit of US Supreme Court guidance on punishment for minors convicted of violent crimes. Despite this dissent, the conviction and sentence stood. Both Crystal and Autumn, the 2 surviving sisters, were placed in protective custody after the murders. They were later adopted by a family and began new lives away from the horror they had experienced. Authorities and family representatives have worked hard to protect their privacy. Detective Bentz and Captain Tenner, the officers who worked the case, said they have not spoken with Crystal over the years, out of respect for her privacy. However, they said they have heard that she is doing very well. Captain Tenner said the focus should be on the survivors and the fact that police were able to save 2 lives that night, rather than dwelling on the 5 who were lost. The Bever family home at 709 Magnolia Court stood empty after the murders. The 2-story house became known as a stigmatized property. Neighbors said they did not want to see a daily reminder of what had happened there. In 2017, the vacant house burned down in a fire. The cause of the fire was never determined and was classified as possible arson. The investigation never identified any suspects. After the house burned, Broken Arrow City Councillor Mike Lester initiated a fundraising effort to purchase the property. He raised $50,000 to buy the land. The plan was to turn the former Bever property into a memorial park. In March 2019, Reflection Park was officially dedicated in a ceremony. The park features a path that meanders through a grassy knoll where the house once stood. There are flower gardens and a simple gazebo. Councillor Lester described it as a place no one wants to remember, but no one can forget. He said it was important to show respect for those who were lost, support for the 2 sisters who survived, and honour for the first responders who gave so much that night. Robert Bever was initially housed at the Joseph Harp Correctional Center in Lexington, Oklahoma. On July 15, 2019, approximately 4 years after the murders, Robert attacked 2 prison staff members. According to an incident report, 2 staff members were standing in the day room around 4:40 p.m. when Robert approached them from behind with an 8-inch sharpened instrument that he had made into a weapon. One staff member, a social services specialist, wrapped Robert in a bear hug from behind and ordered him to drop the weapon. Robert complied. Security staff put him in restraints. He was given a disciplinary report for inmate on staff assault without serious injury. On November 17, 2020, Robert was sentenced to 3 additional life terms for this attack, bringing his total to 9 life sentences. Robert is currently housed at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, in the maximum security unit. Michael is housed at the Lexington Correctional Center. Both will remain incarcerated for the rest of their lives. In November 2025, a decade after the murders, Robert gave his first on-camera interview to a local news station. He spoke with News Channel 8 from prison. When asked about the murders, Robert said, "I think that it's evil to try to justify what I did." He said he understood why people viewed him as evil. He said, "That's probably the best way that person can look at it without trying to understand me. There are people in the world who deserve the peace of mind of hating me and calling me evil." He revealed that his motivation had been what he called terrorism and experiencing combat as a prelude to suicide. District Attorney Kunzweiler said he did not believe this explanation and thought Robert was still being manipulative and dishonest. The case generated significant media attention over the years. It was featured on several true crime television programs, including Dateline, which aired a documentary called Killer Siblings, Bever. The HLN network aired an episode about the case on their show Lies, Crimes and Video. The case continues to be studied as an example of familicide and as a case where two perpetrators worked together to kill their own family members. Detective Eric Bentz, who interviewed both brothers after their arrest, said their thinking showed not much common sense. He said they idolized serial killers and wanted to be famous. 10 years later, when asked about the motive, Bentz said he believes the explanation is simple. Evil. He said, "They're both evil. Pure evil as far as I'm concerned." Captain Brandon Tenner, the first officer on the scene, echoed this sentiment. He said, "The explanation for why they did this can be summed up in evil. They had something evil in them, and they let it out that night." He described the scene as the most inhumane and unexplainable event he had ever been part of in his entire career. Former Broken Arrow Police Chief Brandon Berryhill, now a faculty member at Northeastern State University, said the case highlighted how warning signs can be missed when a family is completely isolated. He said all of society's safeguards for mental health depend on someone noticing a shift in behaviour at work or school. But when someone disconnects completely from the outside world, those warning signs disappear. He emphasised that he did not believe homeschooling itself was the problem. Rather, it was the near total absence of any outside interaction that was concerning. When people choose to be completely reclusive, many things can remain hidden. District Attorney Kunzweiler urged families to take shifts in isolation seriously and to talk to others when something feels wrong. He said a growing fixation on guns or weapons is a warning sign that should not be ignored. David McLeod, a former detective who became a forensic social worker and director of the Anne and Henry Zarrow School of Social Work at the University of Oklahoma, reviewed Robert's interviews and analysed the case. He said Robert wanted to feel much stronger than he actually was. He said Robert's actions were rooted in a deep belief that he did not have control over his environment. McLeod suggested that whatever happened in Robert's early childhood, mixed with the realities of his brain chemistry, led him to seek power through violence. The victims of the Bever family massacre were innocent people who deserved to live. David Bever was 52 years old, a father working to support his large family. April Bever was 44 years old, a mother of 7 children. 12-year-old Daniel Beaver showed tremendous courage in his final moments by calling 911, an action that saved his 2 sisters' lives, even though he could not save his own. 7-year-old Christopher and 5-year-old Victoria were small children who had their entire lives ahead of them. They were killed by the 2 people who should have protected them, their own older brothers. The Bever family murders remain one of the deadliest crimes in Broken Arrow's history, until a murder-suicide in October 2022 killed 8 people. The case shocked the community and the nation. It raised difficult questions about family dynamics, isolation, mental health, and how warning signs of violence might be detected and prevented in the future. Robert and Michael Bever will spend the rest of their lives in Oklahoma prisons, paying for the horrific crimes they committed against their own family. Their names will be remembered not as the famous serial killers they wanted to become, but as family annihilators who destroyed their own parents, siblings, and childhood home in an act of senseless violence that accomplished nothing except death, pain, and lifelong trauma for those who survived. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the final case of the video, case number 5. George Wagner IV and 3 other members of his family killed 8 people from the Roden family in Pike County, Ohio, on the night of April 21st into the early morning hours of April 22nd, 2016. The victims were shot execution style while sleeping in their homes. George was 27 years old at the time of the murders. After a 3-month trial in 2022, a jury found George guilty of all 22 charges against him, including 8 counts of aggravated murder. On December 19, 2022, he was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 121 years for other charges. Prosecutors said George did not fire any of the fatal shots himself, but he planned the murders, participated in carrying them out, and helped cover them up afterward. His brother Edward Wagner, known as Jake, admitted to shooting 5 of the 8 victims. Their parents Angela Wagner and George Wagner III, known as Billy, were also charged in the killings. The 8 victims were Christopher Roden Sr., age 40, his older brother Kenneth Roden, age 44, and their cousin Gary Roden, age 38. Also killed were Christopher's former wife Dana Lynn Roden, age 37, and 3 of their children, Clarence Roden, who was called Frankie, age 20, Hannah Mae Roden, age 19, and Christopher Roden Jr., age 10, age 16. The 8th victim was Hannah Hazel Gilley, age 20, who was engaged to marry Frankie Roden. 3 young children were present during the murders but were not harmed. These children were a 5-day-old baby girl, a 6-month-old baby boy, and a 3-year-old boy. The 3-year-old boy was the daughter of Jake Wagner and Hannah Mae Roden. The Wagner family consisted of George Wagner III, also called Billy, who was 47 years old at the time, his wife Angela Wagner, who was 48, and their 2 sons. George Wagner IV was their older son. Edward Wagner, called Jake, was their younger son and was 26 years old at the time of the murders. The 2 families had been close for years. Jake Wagner and Hannah Mae Roden had dated and had a daughter together, but the relationship between the families had become strained over custody of the little girl. According to prosecutors, the entire murder plot began in December 2015. Angela Wagner was looking through her son Jake's phone or computer when she discovered a Facebook message. The message was between Hannah Mae Roden and a woman named Patricia Sexton, who was the mother of George Wagner IV's former wife. In the message, Hannah and Patricia discussed how the Wagner family had been pressuring Hannah to sign over custody of her daughter to Jake. The Wagners wanted full custody of the little girl. Hannah refused. In a Facebook message sent 4 months before the murders, Hannah wrote that the Wagners would have to kill her first before she would give up custody of her daughter. Angela Wagner showed this message to her son Jake and to the rest of the family. Prosecutors said this is when the Wagner family began planning to kill Hannah and anyone else who might stand in the way of them getting custody of the child. Special Prosecutor Angela Canepa said, during George Wagner IV's trial, that the plot to murder 8 people began with the goal of killing just one person, 19-year-old Hannah Roden. All the other victims were what prosecutors called collateral damage. The Wagners believed that if they killed Hannah and her closest family members, they could raise the little girl without any interference. They thought the people around Hannah were dangerous and should not be raising the child. Jake Wagner later told investigators that when his parents first talked about killing Hannah, he pushed back against the idea, but eventually he agreed to the plan. The family initially planned to kill just 4 members of the Roden family, but as they continued planning over the next 3 months, they decided they needed to kill 8 people to eliminate anyone who might fight for custody of the child or who might witness the crimes. The Wagner family spent 3 months meticulously planning the massacre. They bought masks, ammunition, and brass catchers. Brass catchers are devices that attach to guns and catch the bullet casings as they are ejected, so the casings would not be left behind at the crime scenes as evidence. They bought or built devices to jam cell phone signals so their victims could not call for help. According to testimony at trial, George Wagner IV purchased what prosecutors called the murder truck. This was a vehicle they would use on the night of the killings. George helped modify the truck so he and Jake could hide inside it. Angela Wagner bought shoes from Walmart specifically for Jake and George to wear during the murders. The shoes were never found, and prosecutors believe they were destroyed after the killings. The 2 brothers even dyed their hair in the week before the murders to change their appearance. The Wagner family also built homemade silencers for their guns. They studied the Roden family's routines and learned the layout of their homes. They knew who slept where and when people would be asleep. They stalked the Rodens to gather information about their daily habits. The planning was detailed and methodical. On the night of April 21, 2016, the Wagner family put their plan into action. According to Jake Wagner's later confession and testimony, his father Billy Wagner killed the first victim. This was Christopher Roden Sr. Jake said he fired the first shot that night, but it was his father who actually killed Chris Roden. The killers went to 3 different mobile homes and 1 camper that night. Most of the victims were shot in their beds while they were sleeping. They were shot multiple times in the head, execution style. The first location was Christopher Roden Sr.'s home on Union Hill Road in Piketon. Christopher was shot and killed in his bedroom. His cousin Gary Roden, who was staying at the home, was also shot and killed. At the second location, also on Union Hill Road, the the killers murdered Dana Lynn Roden and her daughter, Hannah Mae Roden. Both were shot multiple times. Hannah's 5-day-old baby daughter was in the room with her, but was not harmed. At a third location, on Union Hill Road, the killers murdered Christopher Roden Jr., who was only 16 years old. His mother Dana's 6-month-old baby son was present, but was not harmed. At this same location, Frankie Roden and his fiancée Hannah Gilley were also killed. About 10 minutes away from these 3 homes, the killers went to a camper where Kenneth Roden, the brother of Christopher Roden Sr., was living. Kenneth was shot and killed in his camper. 3-year-old Sophia, the daughter of Jake Wagner and Hannah Roden, was also at one of the homes that night, but was not harmed by the attackers. Jake Wagner later testified that he personally shot 5 of the 8 victims. He said he shot Hannah Mae Roden, the mother of his child, twice in the head. He also shot Christopher Roden Sr., Dana Lynn Roden, Christopher Roden Jr., and Gary Roden. According to prosecutors, Billy Wagner shot some of the other victims, and there was evidence that possibly Angela Wagner may have been present as well, though she did not fire any shots. Prosecutors said that George Wagner IV was present during the murders. They said he went into the homes with his brother and father. They alleged that George helped his brother Jake move 2 of the bodies. Though George was not accused of pulling the trigger and shooting anyone, prosecutors argued that he was guilty of aggravated murder because he participated in planning the killings, was present when they happened, and helped cover them up afterward. After the murders, the Wagner family tried to destroy evidence. They had collected the bullet casings using the brass catchers. They disposed of the murder weapons in a very specific way. The guns were placed inside buckets, and the buckets were filled with concrete. Later, these concrete-filled buckets were given as a Father's Day gift to a Wagner family member who did not know what was inside them. The family member was told these were boat anchors. The Wagner family member attached the anchors to a rope on a boat. Later, someone cut the rope, and the concrete anchors sank to the bottom of a pond. When Jake Wagner confessed years later, he told investigators where to find the weapons. Authorities got a search warrant and searched the pond. They found the concrete anchors at the bottom. They chipped away the concrete and found the murder weapons inside. Testing showed that the weapons matched shell casing markings found at the murder scenes. The bodies of the Roden family members were discovered on the morning of April 22, 2016. Bobby Jo Manley, who was Dana Roden's sister, came to the homes to feed the pets. When she arrived, she found the horrific scene. She immediately called 911. Police responded and found 7 of the victims at 3 homes on Union Hill Road. The 8th victim, Kenneth Roden, was found in his camper about 10 minutes away. All had been shot execution style. Most were shot multiple times in the head. The 3 young children who survived were taken into protective custody. The discovery of 8 murder victims in one night shocked the small rural community of Pike County. Pike County is located in southern Ohio, about 80 miles east of Cincinnati and about 50 miles from Columbus. The area is rural and close-knit. Nothing like this had ever happened there before. The crime scene spanned 4 different locations. It was immediately clear this was a planned, coordinated attack. Police knew this was not a random act of violence. The investigation that followed became the largest and most expensive criminal investigation in Ohio history. Then Attorney General Mike DeWine, who later became governor of Ohio, called it the most important case going on in the state. He also later said it was one of the longest trials in Ohio history. Estimates from state and local officials placed the total cost of the investigation and prosecution at nearly $4 million, all funded by the state of Ohio. In the early days of the investigation, authorities revealed that there was evidence of marijuana cultivation and cockfighting operations at some of the crime scenes. This led to widespread speculation that the murders might be connected to drug cartels. For more than 2 years, investigators pursued many leads but made no arrests. The community grew frustrated and fearful. People wondered if the killers would ever be caught. Family members made public pleas for information. In June 2017, over a year after the murders, then Attorney General Mike DeWine issued a public inquiry about 4 individuals: George Wagner III, Angela Wagner, George Wagner IV, and Edward Wagner. This signaled that investigators were focusing on the Wagner family, but still no arrests were made. Investigators conducted searches of several properties connected to the Wagner family. They searched an Adams County property about 10 miles from where the Roden bodies were found. They took away trailers belonging to the Wagner family. They searched a property on Peterson Road in Peebles, Ohio, that had been sold by Jake and George Wagner in March 2016, just weeks before the murders. They also searched Flying W Farm in Pike County, which was owned by Frederica Wagner, Jake and George's grandmother. Police found a crucial piece of evidence that helped break the case. A shell casing was found outside the Wagner family's home. This casing matched casings from a gun that killed 5 of the victims. This was a major breakthrough that linked the Wagner family directly to the murder scenes. On November 13, 2018, more than 2.5 years after the murders, authorities finally made arrests. Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine announced that George Wagner III, Angela Wagner, George Wagner IV, and Edward Wagner had all been arrested and charged with planning and carrying out the murders. George Wagner III, called Billy, was arrested in Lexington, Kentucky. Angela Wagner was arrested at her home in Scioto County, Ohio. George Wagner IV was arrested during a traffic stop in Ross County, Ohio. Edward Wagner, called Jake, was arrested during the same traffic stop as his brother. Also arrested that day were Rita Newcomb, who was Angela Wagner's mother and the grandmother of Jake and George, and Frederica Wagner, who was Billy Wagner's mother. Rita Newcomb was 65 years old and was charged with perjury and obstructing justice for allegedly misleading investigators. She was also charged with forging custody documents to cover up the crimes. Frederica Wagner was charged with obstruction and perjury related to a claim that she lied about purchasing a bulletproof vest for Billy before the murders. Those charges against Frederica were later dismissed when it was revealed that a plate in the vest was manufactured after the murders. Prosecutors said they might refile charges at a later date. All 4 members of the Wagner family were charged with 8 counts of aggravated murder and many other charges. Under Ohio law, aggravated murder carries a penalty of either life in prison or the death penalty. The state initially sought the death penalty against all 4 Wagners. However, significant developments would soon change the direction of the case. On April 21, 2021, exactly 5 years to the day after the 8 members of the Roden family were found dead, Jake Wagner appeared in court for a plea hearing. In an emotional statement, he pleaded guilty to all charges against him. He admitted to shooting 5 of the 8 victims. As part of a plea deal with prosecutors, Jake agreed to cooperate with authorities and testify against his family members. In exchange, the state agreed not to seek the death penalty for Jake, his brother George, or his parents Billy and Angela. Jake agreed to be sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. His attorney said in court that Jake understood he would die in prison. The families of the victims had agreed to this plea deal, according to prosecutors. During his plea hearing, Jake apologized in court. He said he was sorry for what he had done. He told the court about a prayer he said shortly after the murders, asking God to put him and his family back on the right path by any means necessary. He said, "I can tell you today I am not sorry I got caught. I'm sorry for what I've done, but I am glad I got caught. I 100% believe that it was Jesus who made me get caught to answer my prayer." Several members of the Roden family walked out of the courtroom as Jake spoke. They could not bear to listen to his apology. The pain and anger they felt was overwhelming. On September 10, 2021, Angela Wagner also accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy, aggravated burglary, tampering with evidence, forgery, unauthorized use of property, and unlawful possession of a dangerous ordinance. The original 8 counts of aggravated murder against her were dismissed as part of the plea agreement. Prosecutors said Angela helped plan the slayings and participated in covering them up, but she did not shoot anyone. She admitted to buying the shoes for her sons to wear during the murders. She admitted to hacking into Hannah Mae Roden's social media accounts to monitor communications and gather information. Angela was sentenced to 30 years in prison. George Wagner IV refused to accept a plea deal. He maintained his innocence and chose to go to trial. His trial began on September 12, 2022 and lasted nearly 3 months. It was held in Pike County Common Pleas Court in Waverly, Ohio. The trial was covered extensively by media from across the state and nation. The prosecution was led by Special Prosecutor Angela Canepa. She laid out the state's case in opening statements, telling the jury that this was one of the most heinous crimes in Ohio history. She explained that the motive was custody of Jake Wagner's young daughter. She said the Wagner family was obsessed with gaining control over the child. She described how they had pressured Hannah Roden to sign over custody, but Hannah refused. When Hannah said they would have to kill her first, The Wagners took that as a challenge and decided to do exactly that. Canepa said the Wagners spent months planning the massacre. She described how they bought equipment, built silencers, studied the Roden family's habits, and prepared in detail. She explained that even though George Wagner IV did not pull the trigger, he was guilty of murder because he planned it, participated in it, and helped cover it up. Under Ohio law, someone who aids and abets a murder is just as guilty as the person who pulls the trigger. The defense was led by attorneys John Parker and Richard Nash. Parker argued in his opening statement that George Wagner IV was not there on the night of the murders. He said George did not know about the plan and would not have let it happen if he had known. Parker said that Jake and Angela Wagner were lying in their testimony to save themselves. He attacked their credibility and their characters. He said the real motive was not custody, but rather Jake and Angela's concerns about alleged abuse of the child. Parker argued there were holes in the prosecution's case and that they could not prove George was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The trial featured testimony from numerous witnesses. The most dramatic testimony came from Jake Wagner, who took the stand for 5 days to testify against his older brother. Jake described in detail what happened on the night of the murders. He said George was there and participated. He said George knew about the plan and helped carry it out. Jake described how he personally shot 5 of the victims. He admitted to shooting Hannah Mae Roden, the mother of his child, twice in the head while she slept. Angela Wagner also testified against her son George. She described the planning that went into the murders. She said the family had discussed it and everyone agreed to the plan. She said they had even put it to a family vote. She testified that George bought the truck used in the murders and helped modify it. She said she bought the shoes for her sons to wear. She admitted to hacking into social media accounts to gather intelligence on the Roden family. George Wagner IV testified in his own defense. He denied any involvement in the murders. He said he knew nothing about the plan and did not participate. He said he was not there on the night of the killings. He maintained his innocence throughout his testimony. Under cross-examination by prosecutors, George was questioned aggressively about inconsistencies in his story and evidence that contradicted his claims. During the trial, prosecutors also presented physical evidence. They showed the jury the murder weapons that had been recovered from the pond. They presented shell casings found at the crime scenes and at the Wagner property that matched. They showed surveillance video of Angela buying shoes at Walmart days before the murders. They presented cell phone records, GPS data, and other evidence that placed the Wagner family at or near the murder scenes. The trial included testimony from forensic experts, law enforcement officers, and family members of the victims. The jury saw photographs of the crime scenes, though the most graphic images were not shown publicly. They heard about the planning, the execution of the murders, and the cover-up that followed. In closing arguments, prosecutor Angela Canepa told the jury that George Wagner showed no remorse and deserved to be convicted. She said he was complicit in the murders because he knew what was going to happen, and he aided and abetted his family in carrying out the killings. She reminded the jury of all the evidence showing George's involvement in planning and covering up the crimes. Defense attorney John Parker argued in his closing that prosecutors simply did not have enough evidence to prove George was guilty. He said George was being punished for his family name and for being a Wagner, but that did not make him a murderer. He said Jake and Angela were lying to save themselves and their testimony could not be trusted. He told the jury everyone had a motive in this case except George. The jury began deliberations on November 29, 2022. After less than 8 hours of deliberation, they reached a verdict on November 30th, 2022. George Wagner IV, now 31 years old, was found guilty on all 22 counts he faced. The jury convicted him of 8 counts of aggravated murder, conspiracy, tampering with evidence, obstructing justice, engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity, and other charges related to the murders. George sat motionless as the verdicts were read. He closed his eyes or looked down. He showed no visible emotion. When the verdicts were finished, he was led away in handcuffs. Members of the Roden family, who filled the courtroom, hugged each other and wiped away tears. Some family members said they felt relief that justice was finally being served, though no verdict could bring back their loved ones. Tony Roden, whose brother Christopher Roden Sr. was among the victims, spoke to reporters outside the courthouse after the verdict. He said he felt sorry for George Wagner because he was human. George Wagner is human, Tony said. They just didn't show it on that night. Governor Mike DeWine, who had been Attorney General when the murders occurred and had overseen the investigation, issued a statement after the verdict. He said, "From the day that these murders occurred and throughout the long investigation, I always believed that we would find the truth, and I always believed there would be justice for the victims." He added, "We're not done yet. There's one more trial," referring to the upcoming trial of Billy Wagner, George's father. Pike County prosecutor Rob Junk spoke emotionally after the verdict. He said the voices of the 8 murdered members of the Roden family were heard in the courtroom. He said good had won that day. George Wagner IV's sentencing hearing was held on December 19, 2022. Judge Randy Deering presided over the sentencing. Before imposing the sentence, the judge allowed family members of the victims to make statements to the court. Andrea Shoemaker, the mother of victim Hannah Hazel Gilley, spoke through tears about losing her daughter. She said, "My baby girl, I miss you beyond words. Another life taken too soon, but will never be forgotten." She looked directly at George Wagner and said, "I pray for you not to live. I want you to die, just like you and your evil family did my baby girl." Kendra Roden, the daughter of victim Kenneth Roden, told the court, "They say 8 lives were taken that day, but many more lives were stolen." She ended her statement by saying directly to George, "I hope you burn in hell, George." April Manley, the sister-in-law of Dana Roden, said, "I hope you feel the loneliness and emptiness we feel for the rest of your life. I hope when you go to sleep at night, you see those 8 faces, and they haunt you for the rest of your life." A victim's advocate read a letter from an aunt of Hannah Gilley, saying, "To you, Hannah was just collateral damage in your sick and twisted plan." Special Prosecutor Angela Canepa spoke during the hearing and said that George Wagner IV does not deserve mercy. George Wagner IV did not make a statement during his sentencing hearing. He remained very stoic, with his eyes closed at times as statements and sentencing were read. His attorneys had filed a motion for a new trial, but Judge Deering denied the motion at the sentencing hearing. Judge Deering addressed the court before imposing sentence. He said, "No sentence that the court may impose in this case would right the wrong that was inflicted upon the victims and the families. Murder is an irreversible act, and although time may alleviate the pain of loss, it has not, obviously, at this point, and may never. It will not and cannot restore to the victims' families what was and what might have been had the lives of their loves not been unlawfully taken and cruelly taken on that night in April in 2016. Judge Deering sentenced George Wagner IV to 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the 8 counts of aggravated murder. For the other charges, he was sentenced to additional prison terms ranging from 10 months to 8 years. He was also sentenced to 81 years on firearms specifications to be served consecutively. The total sentence was 8 consecutive life terms without parole, plus 121 additional years. George Wagner IV will spend every remaining day of his life in prison. He will never be eligible for parole. He will never breathe free air again. Governor Mike DeWine issued a statement after the sentencing. He said, "George Wagner IV will never live another day outside of prison. A sentence that's another step toward justice for the Rodens, Gilleys and Manleys. I spoke with family members this morning, commending them for their courage and their patience as they waited 6+ years for this day." George Wagner IV was initially housed in an Ohio state prison, but was later transferred to a prison in Rhode Island in 2023 for security reasons. His exact location cannot be revealed to the public due to safety concerns. He has filed an appeal of his conviction, arguing that he was denied a fair trial and that the judge made errors during the proceedings. As of 2025, that appeal is still pending before the Ohio Court of Criminal Appeals. On January 3, 2025, Rita Newcomb, Angela Wagner, and Jake Wagner were sentenced in a joint hearing before Judge Jonathan Hine. The hearing brought new developments that surprised many observers. Rita Newcomb, Angela Wagner's mother, spoke at her sentencing and said, "I'm sorry." She had testified for the state during George Wagner's murder trial. She was sentenced to 90 days in jail on an obstruction of official business charge, with 83 days suspended. She had already served 7 days. She was ordered to be placed on probation for 5 years and to pay a $750 fine plus court costs. Her other charges were dismissed. Angela Wagner spoke before her sentencing. She said she knows the pain that members of the Roden and Gilly families feel must be unbearable. She said, "I know the pain must be unbearable, because separated from my family, the ones I love most in the world, brings me unbearable, suffocating pain. To and for this, I am so truly sorry. I know full well that the weight of my crimes, what I've done to you and your family, there's no amount of apology I can give today, no amount of explanation, no thing I can do to help you ease the pain you have, the loss, anger, hate." Several members of the Roden family walked out of the courtroom as she spoke. Judge Hine sentenced Angela Wagner to 30 years in prison, including credit for the 6 years she had already served. With credit for time served and good behaviour, she could potentially be released in about 26 years. Judge Hine said each generation has its own people who prove the depths of depravity of human nature, and this case showed the boundless depravity of people who have no respect for others and only their own self-interest in mind. The most surprising development of the sentencing hearing was what happened with Jake Wagner. Jake had previously agreed to a plea deal for 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Everyone expected Judge Hine to impose that sentence. Instead, Judge Hine surprised the courtroom by sentencing Jake to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 32 years. The judge gave Jake 12 years on gun charges and then 20 years for the murders of the 5 victims he admitted to killing. Jake would need to serve those consecutively, meaning 32 years total before becoming eligible for parole. If released when he is 64 years old, Jake will have to register as a violent offender and a sex offender. Judge Hine explained his reasoning. He said he wanted to distinguish Jake's sentence from George's sentence because Jake had cooperated with authorities while George chose to go to trial. He said he took into account the sentences of other participants in the case, including Angela, who was facing only 30 years despite being what some described as the mastermind. He said it was not fair for Jake to receive exactly the same sentence as George when the levels of cooperation were so different. The judge told Jake, 32 years out, you get your chance because you cooperated, because you did something to acknowledge responsibility for the crime. Before being sentenced, Jake Wagner addressed the court. He said, "There's nothing I can do to ease the pain you have, loss, anger, hate." He said he was not asking for forgiveness, but told the families that hate would not heal their hearts. He talked about a prayer he said shortly after the murders, asking God to put his family back on the straight path by any means necessary. He said, "I can tell you today, I am not sorry I got caught. I'm sorry for what I've done, but I am glad I got caught. I 100% believe that it was Jesus who made me get caught to answer my prayer." Andrea Shoemaker, the mother of victim Hannah Gilly, was furious at the sentencing hearing. She addressed Angela, Jake and Rita saying, "You are the evilest mother to plan, carry out and take the lives of 3 other mothers." She said they were spawns of Satan who ruined her life and innocent children's lives. She said, "It's a heartache that never goes away." The prosecution was outraged by Judge Hine's decision to give Jake the possibility of parole. Special Prosecutor Angela Canepa filed an appeal to the Ohio Supreme Court, challenging Jake's new sentence. She argued that Jake, who admitted to murdering 5 people, should not receive a more lenient sentence than George, who did not kill anyone. She pointed out that Jake would potentially serve only 20 years for the actual killings, while George received life without parole under a complicity theory. The appeal argued this was fundamentally unfair and contrary to the plea agreement. The state has also tried multiple times to have Judge Hine removed from the case. Canepa has filed nearly a dozen affidavits trying to get the judge kicked off, writing in court records that his rulings were knowingly tipping the scale unfairly. So far, those efforts have been unsuccessful. As of mid-2025, one member of the Wagner family still awaits trial. George Wagner III, called Billy, who is now 52 years old, has maintained his plea of not guilty. He faces the same 22 charges that George Wagner IV faced, including 8 counts of aggravated murder. Prosecutors say Billy was directly involved in the killings and pulled the trigger in at least 3 of the murders. A trial date has been set and then delayed multiple times. Judge Hine granted a defense motion to move Billy's trial out of Pike County, ruling that he could not get a fair trial there. The prosecution has appealed that decision. It remains unclear when Billy Wagner will finally face a jury or where the trial will take place. The Pike County Massacre destroyed 2 families and devastated an entire community. 8 innocent people were murdered in cold blood as they slept in their homes. Christopher Roden Sr. was a father and provider for his family. Dana Lynn Roden was a mother who was trying to protect her children. Kenneth Roden was a man who lived in a camper and was killed just because he was related to the main targets. Gary Roden was a cousin who happened to be staying at the wrong place at the wrong time. Frankie Roden was a young man engaged to be married who had his whole life ahead of him. Christopher Roden Jr. was only 16 years old, a teenager who should have had decades of life left to live. Hannah Mae Roden was a 19-year-old mother fighting to keep custody of her daughter. Hannah Gilley was only 20 years old and engaged to marry Frankie. All 8 were murdered to eliminate any obstacles to the Wagner family's obsessive desire for custody of one small child. 3 children were spared and survived the massacre. Those children will grow up knowing their family members were killed. The trauma of that night will affect them for the rest of their lives. The surviving members of the Roden family have endured years of grief, anger, and frustration as they waited for justice. The Pike County Massacre became the largest murder investigation in Ohio history. It cost nearly $4 million to investigate and prosecute. It took more than 2 years to make arrests. It took 6 more years to get convictions. The legal process is still not complete, as appeals continue and Billy Wagner awaits trial. George Wagner IV will spend the rest of his life in an out-of-state prison, locked away from society. He continues to maintain his innocence and has filed appeals. But the jury heard the evidence, deliberated, and found him guilty on all counts. The sentence ensures he will never harm anyone again. He will never walk free. He will die in prison. The case stands as a reminder of how obsession, control, and a desire for custody can escalate into unimaginable violence. 8 people were murdered over a custody dispute. An entire family was destroyed because the Wagner family could not accept that Hannah Roden would not give up her daughter. The carefully planned massacre that unfolded over 3 months of preparation shows the depths of depravity that people are capable of when they lose all perspective and humanity. For the people of Pike County, the wounds from that April night in 2016 will never fully heal. The community was shattered by the revelation that people they knew were capable of such evil. Trust was broken. Fear lingered for years until arrests were made. Even now, with convictions secured, the pain remains. No amount of prison time can bring back the 8 lives that were taken. No sentence can restore what was lost that night. Justice has been served in the courtroom, but for the families of the victims, the sentence of living without their loved ones continues every single day. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.